A massive explosion nearly wiped out an entire group of adventurers. The creature responsible was a platinum rank monster, one of the most dangerous classifications in existence, and it was causing devastation with complete ease. Even the strongest adventurers present were utterly powerless against it. They stood exhausted and beaten before an enormous dragon that roared with contempt, making clear its belief that humans were nothing before the might of dragons. Among the battered group, a knight covered in blood barely managed to keep himself upright by leaning on his sword, his body pushed far beyond its limits. Then from behind a cloud of slowly clearing smoke, the dragon sensed a presence. A large man wearing eyeglasses and a tuxedo stepped calmly out of the smoke, holding nothing but a baseball bat. He appeared completely unaware that others were already in the area and casually acknowledged the group. The knight turned to him immediately, demanding to know who he was and ordering him to leave at once, bewildered by the man's strange appearance and equally strange choice of weapon. The dragon roared furiously and declared its intention to reduce every human present to ash. Without any visible fear or hesitation, the tuxedo man swung his bat in the direction of the dragon. The adventurers watched in stunned disbelief as the massive creature erupted in blood. Before anyone could process what they had just witnessed, the enormous dragon collapsed and died, defeated in a single swing. The tuxedo man remarked casually to himself about the satisfying sound of the impact, and nothing more. Far away from that scene, on an ordinary morning at the sales department of a publishing company called Tokyo Adventure Book Co., a pair of thin hands moved steadily over a keyboard. The man typing was Keita Sato, a slender man in his early 40s who wore glasses and lived alone. He was 41 years old, unmarried, and by every measure a perfectly ordinary office worker at a publishing company. In the background, his manager's voice rose sharply as she vented her frustration into a telephone, furious about something that had apparently been canceled at the last minute. Keita glanced over at her briefly and then returned his attention to his screen. He remembered what it had been like when he first joined the company 18 years ago, fresh out of university. Fantasy novels and manga had been enormously popular back then. The industry was healthy and growing, and securing a position there had felt like a genuine achievement. The world had changed dramatically since. 18 years ago, an event that came to be known as the dungeon disaster had struck without warning, causing dungeons to appear all across the world and forcing humanity into direct conflict with the monsters that emerged from them. Defeating those monsters produced powerful items, and the people who fought them became known as adventurers, celebrated as the heroes of the age. It was natural that young people everywhere had begun to dream of that life. The generation that had grown up knowing nothing else, born into a world where dungeons were simply a fact of daily existence, were called dungeon natives. They treated dungeon exploration as both a career and a form of entertainment, and many live-streamed their adventures to large audiences on social media. Because reality had become more thrilling than any fantasy story could offer, the demand for fantasy publications had collapsed. Keita thought to himself that it was no surprise their book sales had been declining. To survive, the company had pivoted toward producing books and merchandise tied to popular dungeon streamers. Keita sat with that thought and quietly concluded that he had officially crossed into old age, having reached the point where he genuinely could not understand what young people found appealing about any of it. His manager ended her call and turned to him, still frustrated, asking whether he was trying to sneak out. Keita pointed out that his working hours were over. His manager pressed on, bringing up the latest incident involving Verigud and telling him that everyone affected needed to be apologized to, and that he would need to assist with that. Keita noted that the matter fell under his junior colleague Ukai's area of responsibility. His manager agreed, but said they needed every available person involved. Before the conversation could go further, Ukai herself stepped in, clearly distressed. She was flushed and on the verge of tears, insisting that she could not allow Keita, her senior colleague, to be dragged into something that was entirely her responsibility. Ukai was in her second year at the company, having joined straight from university, and was the person specifically in charge of all live streamer-related matters. She was deeply conscientious and talented, far more so than Keita believed himself to be. He had seen others leave the company because the pressure of that kind of work had eventually broken them down mentally and physically, and he did not want to see the same happen to her. Keita smiled at her and said gently that things would be lighter if shared between two people. Ukai flushed at his words. The manager turned on Keita and told him he should have shown more willingness to cooperate from the start, and that since he was out of touch with the world of dungeon streamers, the very least he could contribute was to get down on his knees and bow deeply in apology on behalf of the company. Ukai quietly protested that the comment was a little harsh. Keita told her not to worry about it. He acknowledged openly that she contributed far more to the company than he did, and said with a calm smile that if kneeling down was all that was needed from him, it was a very small price to pay. Ukai was visibly moved and flustered by his words. Neither she nor the manager noticed that Keita had quietly extended one finger, as if he were keeping a private count of something. Keita let out a quiet sigh as his mind drifted back to how much better life had been 18 years ago, not just in terms of how the world looked, but in purely practical terms as well. His salary had been considerably better back then too. That evening, having stayed late again to put in overtime, he made his way through the lively and crowded streets on his walk home. Something caught his attention and brought him to a stop, along with several other people nearby. A familiar and distinctive piece of music began playing from a large digital billboard overhead. Keita looked up and found himself watching a live endorsement from Swearin, an official streamer for ZBK, who was promoting Doom Productions' open recruitment for streamers joining their third season. In reality, Keita had been looking upward not at the billboard, but at the sign for a 24-hour noodle shop located just below it. His stomach was growling with hunger, but when he saw that even a basic beef bowl would cost 490 yen, he grimaced and walked away without going in. As he continued down the street, someone behind him suddenly unleashed a burst of fire magic out in the open. The people around the one responsible laughed and half-heartedly pointed out that using magic publicly was the kind of thing that could get someone arrested. The young man who had done it brushed off the concern entirely, convinced that being outrageous was the fastest path to going viral, and that without growing their subscriber numbers they would not make any money. The hooded young man who had cast the fire then let his gaze drift lazily over to Keita and made a pointed remark, clearly intended for Keita to hear, about having no desire to end up as a dull corporate slave, spending his life staring at cheap food like some middle-aged nobody. His companions found it hilarious, having caught Keita looking longingly at the noodle shop sign moments before. Keita felt the irritation rise in him, but said nothing and did not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. He quietly extended a second finger in his private count, turned away, and boarded the train. He had heard plenty of times that adventurers were now earning considerably more than ordinary company employees. He closed his eyes on the train and let the thought settle without attaching any feeling to it. Their choices were their own. His life was his own. That was enough. A short while later he arrived home and apologized for coming back so late. Hikari, his 16-year-old niece, was sprawled on the sofa scrolling through her phone. She looked up with a bright smile and welcomed him home, getting up to offer him the cheese curry she had made for dinner. Keita thanked her and admitted that the late work had left him hungry. Hikari was the daughter of his older sister, making her his niece, and she was already tying on her apron and heading to the kitchen to heat the food up for him. After his parents had passed away, Keita had been living alone in the house he inherited from them. That changed when his sister returned home with Hikari following the breakdown of her marriage. Having his sister around was one adjustment. Having a teenage girl in the house was an entirely different one. As he glanced over at Hikari in the kitchen, he noticed her shirt was cut open at the sides in a way that seemed quite revealing, though he felt he was in no position to say anything about it. A few moments later Keita sat down and took his first mouthful of the curry. He told Hikari it was genuinely delicious. She smiled and told him he was welcome, then teased him warmly that the way he ate with such obvious enjoyment made her want to keep cooking for him. Keita thought privately that food had become the only real pleasure in an otherwise dull and uneventful daily existence. He then noted that her cooking had improved a great deal. Hikari said cheerfully that it was because she put all of her love into it when she cooked for him. Keita, completely missing the sentiment, moved on to complimenting how nicely she had cut the carrots into little star shapes. Hikari found his total obliviousness a little deflating and remarked to herself that he was hopelessly blunt. She glanced down at her phone and noticed something on screen involving Overworked, the dungeon live streaming group that her friends adored. She asked Keita if he knew of them. Keita said nothing outwardly, but thought to himself that he had just spent the evening working overtime to deal with the trouble they had caused. On the screen, Overworked was in the middle of a public statement to their followers. They announced that they had absolutely no regrets about the recent controversy, that they had simply said what they wanted to say, and that they felt it was unreasonable that people in Japan had reacted the way they had. They insisted they had not done anything wrong and expressed genuine confusion about why anyone was upset. That was the breaking point for Keita. Even Hikari found their attitude disgusting and cocky, and she noticed that her uncle's expression had gone very dark. Keita quietly extended a third finger. He stood up abruptly, thanked Hikari for the meal, and told her he was heading out for a bit. When she asked where he was going at that hour, he said only that he felt like some exercise. He put on his jacket, told her it was getting late and that she should go to sleep, and headed out the door. Hikari wished him a good time and watched him go, but after a moment a slow smirk spread across her face. She slipped out after him into the busy streets, trailing him from a distance with her phone held up to film. Hikari had long found her uncle strange. He had a habit of disappearing at odd hours and returning home with blood on him, which had startled her more than once. On one occasion while doing his laundry, she had found an extremely rare item tucked inside one of his shirts. When she had it professionally appraised, she was told it was something that could only come from SSS-ranked monsters found in the absolute deepest layers of a dungeon. Despite all of this, Keita consistently acted completely indifferent toward the world of dungeon live streaming and adventuring. Hikari was certain he was hiding something significant, and she had decided that tonight she would finally catch him in the act and find out what it was. She followed him until they arrived in front of a large building. Outside, a group of people were holding a protest about reclaiming Shinjuku and demanding the dungeons be freed. Hikari was surprised to find that the building was simply a batting cage. She watched from concealment as her uncle paid for an hour at the registration booth. What Hikari had not made known to anyone was that she was herself a registered adventurer, operating under the name Hikari Nindo, whose primary ability was a stealth skill ranked at SSS level. Using that skill now, she followed her uncle through the facility without making her presence known. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary until she watched Keita open a particular door and step through it, vanishing completely the instant it closed behind him. Hikari was shaken. She crept closer and examined the door, where a notice appeared indicating that the dungeon beyond was recommended for adventurers of level 140 and above. She could barely believe what she was seeing. Keita had walked through without any hesitation or visible preparation whatsoever. Hikari stood there knowing that even a gold-ranked adventurer would struggle to survive 10 minutes inside a place like that. The whole thing felt dangerous and deeply unsettling, though she reassured herself that her SSS-ranked stealth would keep her protected if she followed him inside. Hikari crept through the dungeon behind her uncle, quietly worrying whether he would be all right moving so carelessly through such a dangerous place. Her concern sharpened quickly when a massive creature pulled itself out of the shadows ahead. She recognized it immediately as a diamond frog, a type of monster known for its ability to blend seamlessly into walls and ceilings, making it nearly impossible to detect until it was already striking. The sight of it made her stomach turn. Diamond frogs were creatures whose entire bodies functioned as deadly weapons, and their skin could not be damaged by any conventional attack. Hikari panicked, certain that an ordinary man in a business suit would be killed the moment one of those things reached him. The diamond frog launched itself at Keita. Hikari cried out a warning, but her voice never reached him. Behind his glasses, Keita's expression shifted and became completely focused. As the creature came roaring toward him, he drew his metal bat in one smooth motion and swung it cleanly, sending the frog flying far across the dungeon floor. Hikari stood frozen in shock. Keita looked almost giddy in the aftermath, visibly pleased by the sound the impact had made. Hikari thought her uncle was absolutely terrifying. The fact that he had just dropped a diamond frog in a single hit was staggering to her. Even one of the most celebrated dungeon streamers in existence, a wealthy CEO, who fought with a sword valued at 300 million yen, had needed 2 hits to bring one down. Before she could fully absorb what she had seen, Hikari snapped back to alertness. The name diamond frogs was plural for a reason. These creatures never traveled alone, and sure enough, a large group of them descended on Keita from every direction. He planted his feet and launched into a relentless assault, swinging with full force again and again. With each powerful blow, he appeared to be releasing something deep and personal that had been building up inside him all day. He struck one frog for his overbearing and unreasonable boss, another for the arrogant young people who had mocked him on the street, and reserved his most furious swing for the dungeon livestreamers who caused chaos and suffering for those around them without ever stopping to care about anyone but themselves. Hikari watched wide-eyed as her uncle tore through every single frog in one hit each, using the creatures as an outlet for everything that had been grinding him down. When the last one was gone, Keita stood still and exhaled slowly and deeply, his face carrying an expression of calm and genuine satisfaction. It was the most alive and energetic Hikari had ever seen him look. She found herself feeling a quiet wave of sympathy, wondering whether he had been coming here all along to release the weight of his daily life without anyone ever knowing. Then a thought struck her and she pulled out her phone. Almost on impulse, she began live streaming. Comments appeared almost immediately. Viewers quickly identified from the monsters Keita was fighting that he was not in any upper layer of the dungeon, but somewhere deep and genuinely dangerous. Some recalled having seen diamond frogs in a walkthrough by the popular streamer Swearin and noted that even she had barely managed to defeat one. Others were puzzled by Keita's appearance, asking why he was in a suit, where his team was, and what kind of equipment he was carrying. Requests to see his face came flooding in among the growing wave of comments. Then the ground trembled as an explosion erupted directly in front of Keita, and from the blast a gigantic serpent uncoiled into view. It was a diamond boa, a boss monster ranked at the highest SSS level. The comment section erupted into panic as viewers feared the worst for Keita. Hikari screamed in terror, recognizing the creature as something that pushed far beyond what most adventurers could handle. The diamond boa lunged at Keita with tremendous force. Keita, still deep in the act of venting everything that had been weighing on him, did not hear his niece's screams. The sharp clang of his metal bat rang out as he blocked the creature's attack and swung back hard. The force of the collision sent tremors rippling through the dungeon walls. The livestream audience was convinced it was over and that Keita had been killed. Then everything went still. The diamond boa stopped moving, and the viewers fell into confused silence, unsure of what had just happened. Hikari looked at her uncle and caught her breath. He was still standing, still wearing his suit, still holding his bat, but his body appeared noticeably larger and more powerful than before. She could not believe what she was seeing. The livestream feed cleared and revealed Keita's buffed-up form to the audience, leaving every viewer watching in stunned silence and confusion. Keita steadied himself and gripped the bat tightly. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes, and his mind traveled back to his school days. He saw himself as a young boy being ordered around by a classmate named Shun, who dumped cleaning duties on him so he could run off and play soccer with friends. The young Keita had reminded Shun that he himself had agreed to do it, but Shun had simply walked away without a second thought. Young Keita had smiled on the outside, while burning silently with anger on the inside. He remembered how it had always been that way. Everyone offloaded their unwanted tasks onto him, and the people around him either felt vaguely sorry for him or laughed it off, assuming he was happy to help since he never pushed back. Then he thought about his manager's cutting remark about him being an out-of-touch old-timer. He thought about the arrogant young man on the street who had sneered at the idea of becoming a corporate nobody like him. And then he thought about Verigud, standing before their audience with no remorse whatsoever while he had worked overtime trying to clean up the damage they had caused without a single thought for anyone else. Every one of those memories compressed itself into the grip of his hands on the bat. With a furious roar, Keita swung with everything he had. The diamond boa erupted in a spray of blood and was sent flying, crashing to the ground with its head severed. The livestream audience exploded. Viewers could not believe that someone had just defeated a boss monster in the deepest dungeon layer using nothing but a cheap metal bat. Some declared it the arrival of a remarkable new figure on the scene. Others noted from the little they could observe that the fighter appeared to be an older man. The overwhelming reaction was one of pure awe, with many praising the sheer power on display and even the deeply satisfying sound of the hit. Comments of every kind flooded in from all directions. Hikari's hand trembled around her phone as she watched the stream go viral in real time. She stared in complete amazement at her uncle standing there, drenched from head to toe in the blood raining down from the fallen diamond boa. In her eyes, he was simply extraordinary. In just that one night stream, she had already crossed 10,000 subscribers. Keita, unaware of everything happening around him, let out a long sigh and felt genuinely good for the first time all day. Hikari stood watching it all with a wide smile, already catching the unmistakable and intoxicating scent of money in the air. 18 years ago, dungeons began appearing all over the world without any warning in an event that came to be known as the Dungeon Disaster. It was something the world had never seen before, and it threw Japanese society into a state of deep confusion and uncertainty. The internet and mass media became flooded with speculation and fear about what it all meant and what would come next. The world was standing on the edge of something completely unknown. And yet, even at that extraordinary moment, Japanese office workers were still filing into their workplaces and carrying on with their usual tasks without missing a step. Keita Sato was 23 years old at the time. On the very first day of the disaster, workers were sent home early for once. The trains came to a complete halt, and the air around the city crackled with a sense that something historic and world-changing was unfolding. But by the very next morning, the trains were back on schedule and everyone was expected at their desks again, as though nothing significant had happened at all. Japan was simply too committed to returning to normal as quickly as possible. Keita had very little energy or motivation left over for anything outside of work. It was only after entering adult life that he had come to fully understand how much time and energy a hobby actually required, two things that his job consumed almost entirely. The one hobby he had managed to hold on to was his visits to a batting cage in Shinjuku. On one particular day, he had made up his mind to earn the certificate for successfully hitting a ball thrown at 160 kilometers per hour, the fastest in the entire Kanto region. Others might have found it strange or even wasteful to drag himself to a batting cage when he was already exhausted from work, but that time was sacred to him. It was the only way he knew how to release the pressure that built up inside him. He stood in the cage, gripping his metal bat tightly as the ball came hurtling toward him at that incredible speed, determined to meet it cleanly. At the same time, on the other side of the facility, chaos was already breaking out. The storekeeper screamed in horror as something that was clearly not a ball went ricocheting violently around the room. The force of the thing was terrifying, and it tore straight through one of the people present, leaving them impaled. As it rolled along the floor, a surviving bystander caught sight of something wriggling free from the body of the person who had been struck. It was a small monster. The realization sent everyone in the batting cage into a screaming panic, and they scattered and fled in every direction. Keita, still inside his cage and fully absorbed in his challenge, heard the commotion around him and was irritated by the noise just as he was beginning to find his rhythm. He was locked in deep concentration when the small monster suddenly burst through the wall directly in front of him. Reacting entirely on instinct, Keita swung his bat with precise timing, automatically adjusting to match the speed of the moving target. He had no idea it was not a ball. What he had actually struck with that clean and powerful swing was a metal slug, the very creature responsible for the carnage that had been spreading through the facility. Metal slugs were known in dungeon terms for yielding an enormous amount of experience points when defeated. Keita, having taken one out in a single hit, was overjoyed. He pumped his fist and ran excitedly to the manager to collect his home run certificate. Only when he arrived did he take in the scene around him. Dead bodies were scattered across the floor. He stood there completely bewildered, with no understanding of what had happened while he had been focused on his challenge. Keita was snapped back to the present by his alarm clock going off. He lay there for a moment, aware that he had been sweating heavily in his sleep, the memory of that day still vivid enough to disturb his rest. He had hit a monster by accident. It was a completely absurd thing to say out loud, but it was the truth. And yet he had never allowed himself to treat it as anything more than a strange coincidence. A miracle happening by chance did not mean his life had changed, or that he was anything other than what he had always been. Going to dungeons was simply his hobby, his private way of managing stress. He was still, at his core, a perfectly ordinary office worker. He straightened his tie, composed himself, and headed out of his room. His sister was already at the dining table and offered him a cup of coffee. Keita accepted and sat down with her. The woman was Akari Amahara, formerly Akari Sato, his older sister by 2 years and Hikari's mother. She immediately noticed that Keita seemed stiff and unusually formal around her and questioned him about it, asking whether her sudden return to the house was making him uncomfortable. Keita explained that with Hikari living there now, he felt the need to carry himself more like a responsible adult. Akari found that answer mature, but quickly moved on, asking where he had been the previous night. Keita went rigid with alarm on the inside. She told him that the house had been completely empty when she came home. Keita panicked internally, fully aware that he could not tell her he had been sneaking off to dungeons every night to beat monsters as a stress management method. His sister, being dramatic about how lonely she had felt, grabbed him and insisted he acknowledge her properly. Keita, trying to redirect the conversation, asked where Hikari was, since he had told her to go to bed before he left. His sister, eyes glistening, told him that Hikari had informed her she was out doing a dungeon livestream. In the middle of the night, Keita was immediately concerned. He told his sister firmly that it was dangerous and that she needed to put a stop to it. His sister agreed in principle, but pointed out that live streaming was currently one of the most financially rewarding careers available to young people. Keita pulled out his phone and looked up Hikari's channel, finding that she had 1,503 subscribers across 5 videos. He was not sure whether that was considered a respectable number. His sister said plainly that it was quite modest. She then reminded him that he worked in a field connected to all of this. Keita agreed without really thinking about it. His sister then said something more serious. She told him that she did not want to be the kind of parent who crushed a child's dream by standing in the way of what they wanted to pursue. She let that thought settle for a moment, and then told him that with that in mind, she wanted him to be the one to stop Hikari. Keita was not happy about being positioned as the person who had to play the bad guy. He got ready for work and declined his sister's offer to make him a quick breakfast, saying he would grab something at a convenience store, and headed out with a simple farewell. A few minutes later at the train station, he found himself walking past a small cluster of people engaged in conversation. 2 high school students nearby were discussing someone called the Shinjuku Batter, marveling at the fact that this mysterious figure apparently fought using nothing but a metal bat. One of them wondered whether the Shinjuku Batter was a live streamer, and the other confirmed that was the general belief. Keita listened and sighed, already feeling the weight of another day ahead that would involve cleaning up the ongoing mess left by Overworked. Even the thought of it was enough to make him feel unwell. The conversations around him continued with people buzzing about dungeon streamers in general. Keita reminded himself that since live streamers were directly tied to his professional responsibilities, it probably made sense to become a little more informed about them. He found himself idly wondering what kind of person the Shinjuku Batter actually was. He sighed again and happened to glance at the businessman standing behind him on the platform, who looked every bit as hollow and worn out as Keita felt himself. When Keita arrived at work, he found Ukai already there, looking absolutely wrecked. Her face was puffy and her hands were shaking. She had not slept at all through the night. Overworked's apology video had gone viral again for all the wrong reasons, sending their sponsors into a fury and forcing Ukai to spend the entire night composing and sending sincere apology emails to each of them one by one. Keita took one look at her pitiful state and quietly reached into his eco bag. He pulled out some food and handed it to her, gently suggesting she eat something, then find a place to rest and clean herself up, noting that the office air conditioning would have shut off overnight and left her sweating through the night in the heat. Ukai was grateful and accepted the rice ball he gave her. As she ate, she brought up the question of what they were supposed to do about the Overworked situation going forward. Streamers signed to major agencies like Doom Production consistently ignored their messages and requests entirely. She was struggling to think of any popular streamer who would realistically agree to work within their limited budget. Keita, trying to offer something helpful, mentioned in good spirits that his own niece had recently started her own streaming channel. Ukai asked how many subscribers she had. When Keita said it was around 1,500, Ukai apologized immediately and said that number was nowhere near enough for what they needed. She sighed and expressed her hope that the person everyone was talking about, the Shinjuku Batter, might be willing to respond to them. Keita looked at her and asked whether that person was actually well known. Ukai's exhaustion briefly lifted as she launched into an excited explanation. The Shinjuku Batter had been the single biggest topic of conversation the previous night. This person had gained over 10,000 subscribers on their very first broadcast alone, which was a staggering achievement for any solo streamer operating without the backing of an agency. On top of that, this mysterious figure had gone into the deeper dungeon layers entirely alone for their debut stream and had defeated an SSS-ranked boss monster known as the Diamond Boa. Ukai was buzzing with the feeling that this could be the start of something truly legendary. Keita listened quietly and felt a cold jolt of recognition. The Diamond Boa was the exact same creature he had fought and defeated the previous night. He asked Ukai casually just how strong that monster was supposed to be. She told him that Verigud's entire team had been completely defeated by it. The Diamond Boa possessed an ability called Diamond Power that reduced any physical damage dealt to it by 90%, making it nearly impossible to harm through conventional means. It was considered one of the most formidable boss monsters in existence, the kind that even a full raid party of more than 20 experienced adventurers would struggle to bring down. Keita thought back to the encounter quietly. He recalled that while the Diamond Boa's outer scales were genuinely extremely tough, its internal structure was actually quite fragile by comparison. The key was landing a hit with the sweet spot of the bat and channeling the impact force inward rather than letting it scatter off the surface. The damage could get through if the hit was precise enough. He sat with the growing unease of this thought. The timing was too close to be comfortable. The Shinjuku batter had defeated the Diamond Boa on the very same night he had been in that dungeon. But Keita had not been live streaming. He never did. Going to dungeons was his hobby and nothing more, his private method of managing the stress of daily life. He convinced himself it had to be a coincidence and tried to leave it there. A few hours later, Keita and Ukai stood together in front of their manager. The manager explained that Verigud had built their large subscriber base by consistently producing controversial content that always walked the line of going viral. And while their methods were questionable, they had been genuinely useful to the company because they were available and willing to take on assigned projects. But the manager had clearly run out of patience entirely. She told them bluntly that Verigud was being cut loose and ordered Ukai to move quickly and find a replacement dungeon streamer to fill the gap. She also warned both of them to prepare for a sustained period of overtime work until a suitable replacement was secured. The moment that word landed, both Keita and Ukai looked as though all the life had drained completely out of them. Across town at school, Hikari was sitting at her desk, barely able to contain herself as she snuck looks at her phone. The channel she had secretly created for her uncle had already reached a remarkable 17,000 subscribers. She was practically glowing, quietly gushing to herself about how incredible he was and expressing her adoration for him. Her friend sitting beside her looked at the whole situation with a flat and unimpressed expression, asking Hikari drily whether she had some kind of unusual arrangement going on. She pointed out that streaming someone without their knowledge or permission was not something that could continue indefinitely, and that Hikari was going to get caught eventually and find herself in genuine trouble. She also noted that Keita was clearly the kind of person who actively disliked being in the spotlight. Hikari waved it all off with a confident grin. She knew her uncle well enough to be certain that anything connected to youth culture made him deeply uncomfortable, and that he had no interest in watching live streams of any kind. The idea of him accidentally discovering the channel seemed essentially impossible to her. Her friend shook her head and remarked that it sounded like Keita had a real allergy to anything young people were into. She then mentioned something she had come across while doing a bit of research on her own. It turned out that the batting cage in Shinjuku that Keita visited regularly was the very same facility that had been caught in the middle of the dungeon disaster 18 years ago. Hikari confirmed with her friend that she was talking about the dungeon disaster. Her friend explained further that many people had lost their lives at that batting cage facility during the event, and that even after it had eventually been allowed to reopen, the dungeon gate that had appeared there during the disaster had never closed or gone away. Hikari noted that this was not particularly unusual on its own, and her friend agreed, pointing out that there were many such gates scattered all around Shinjuku. Only a small number of them were officially registered and managed by the Japan Adventurers Guild, but those managed ones were the ones most commonly used by adventurers because of how accessible and straightforward they were to enter. What made the specific gate that Keita used stand out, however, was something far more significant. Her friend explained that the gate he frequented was one that bypassed all the intermediate layers entirely and deposited anyone who entered directly into the absolute deepest layer of the dungeon. It was the kind of place where even the most elite and highly ranked adventuring parties in the country could be wiped out if they went in carelessly without thorough preparation. Hikari listened to all of this and felt a fresh and powerful surge of admiration for her uncle, delighting quietly in just how extraordinary he was without anyone around him even knowing it. Her friend, however, shifted to a more serious and pointed tone. She reminded Hikari that her uncle was not just some stranger. He was someone who had genuinely been there for her during some of the hardest periods of her life. She asked Hikari directly and honestly whether it was truly all right to be broadcasting him to the world without his knowledge or his consent. The question clearly landed. Hikari's expression went visibly guilty. Her friend softened slightly, acknowledging that she understood the temptation completely, especially given that the video had already generated an enormous number of views and was still growing. Hikari took a breath and told her friend, Mia, that she had made up her mind. She would tell her uncle the truth. Mia said that was absolutely the right decision. Then Hikari added, with complete sincerity and without any apparent irony, that she would tell him the truth after she had become a billionaire. Mia was left completely speechless by this. A little while later, walking through the school hallway, Hikari shared her immediate practical plan with Mia. She was going to set up filters on all future stream uploads that would automatically blur her uncle's face and disguise his voice before anything reached the public server, meaning that even if she continued to film and broadcast him going forward, his identity would remain completely unrecognizable to anyone watching. Mia understood the plan immediately and acknowledged it was a workable solution. Hikari praised her friend warmly for being so knowledgeable about how these things functioned online. Shortly after, Hikari's phone rang. It was Keita calling. He was letting her know that he would be working overtime again that evening and wanted to make sure she was aware so she would not worry. Hikari repeated the word overtime with mild surprise and asked him about dinner. Keita started to say something about going to the batting cage, but caught himself just in time, quickly pivoting and saying instead that he was planning to go out for a drink after work. Hikari accepted this without questioning it further. She then asked him, with carefully practiced casualness, whether the GPS location feature on his phone was currently switched on. Keita said he did not really use that particular feature. Hikari told him it would be reassuring for her if he could turn it on when he was out late at night, framing it as something she wanted simply so she would know when he was on his way home, saying the house felt too quiet and lonely without him. Keita agreed without any suspicion and said he would enable it. The moment the call ended, Hikari was internally triumphant. She now had a direct and reliable way to track exactly where her uncle was at any given moment. Mia, standing beside her and having witnessed the whole exchange, remarked with some amazement at the nerve Hikari had shown. Hikari immediately went to the channel she had created for her uncle and posted an announcement for her growing audience, letting them know that the Shinjuku batter would be going live that evening. She was already looking forward with excitement to whatever her uncle would unknowingly provide for the stream that night. Meanwhile, deep in the Shinjuku dungeon, near one of the gates leading to the lower layers, a group of adventurers were gathered together in low and troubled spirits, trying to figure out what their next move was. Their work had fallen through, and they were anxious about what came next. Among them were members going by the names Mash, Vinegar, and Salt, all of them rattled and uncertain. Salt tried to defend some of their past actions, arguing that gathering weaker monsters together in large numbers to level up more efficiently was a perfectly reasonable strategy and that there was nothing wrong with it. Mash pushed back, noting that people who had studied dungeon behavior closely had warned that concentrating too many monsters in one area risked triggering a berserk state in which they became uncontrollable and far more dangerous. Salt dismissed the concern, insisting they had done it many times before without any such outcome. Leaning quietly against a crumbling wall with a more calculating expression than the others, a member named Potato brought up the fact that a well-known live streamer named Swearin happened to be scheduled to stream that day. Salt immediately perked up at the mention of her name, praising her enthusiastically. He suggested they make a surprise appearance during her stream and propose a collaboration, reasoning that the unexpected nature of it would generate a lot of attention and views. Potato, however, thought this was far too modest and ordinary a plan for what they actually needed. He explained that what they required was something dramatic enough to completely bury the controversy that was currently surrounding them and wiping out their reputation. He laid out his thinking. If they could arrange a situation in which a live streamer appeared to be in genuine and serious danger during a live broadcast, and then sweep in to dramatically rescue her in front of the audience, the heroic image it would create would be far more powerful and far-reaching than any simple collaboration could ever be. The group listening to him and nodding along was none other than Verigud themselves, the controversial dungeon live streaming team, with 420,000 subscribers, sitting in the shadows of the dungeon and quietly plotting the scheme they hoped would salvage what was left of their public image. Late that night somewhere in Tokyo, Ukai noticed Keita quietly counting to himself and asked if something was bothering him. Keita let his frustration out openly as they walked together. The whole situation was more aggravating than he had expected it to be. His core complaint was straightforward. Any company that wanted people to work for them had a basic obligation to compensate those people properly, and this was especially true when what they wanted was people capable of delivering real and meaningful results. Instead, their manager was trying to source high-quality work at the lowest possible cost, and on top of that was loading them with unpaid overtime on top of an already draining workday. Paid overtime was something Keita could tolerate and push through, but being forced to give up his personal time for nothing in return was an entirely different and far less acceptable matter. His irritation grew steadily with every passing minute as he talked it through. Ukai apologized for pulling him into work that was originally hers to carry. Keita told her firmly that she had absolutely nothing to apologize for. Ukai, wanting to express her gratitude in some tangible way, spotted a ramen shop nearby and suggested she treat him to a bowl as a small gesture of thanks. Keita declined immediately, He straightened his glasses and explained that he could not allow a junior colleague to pay for him, and that beyond personal preference, there was a professional conduct dimension to consider as well. Going out to eat together as two co-workers of the opposite gender was the kind of thing that could easily lead to uncomfortable situations. Ukai thought privately that since neither of them was married, there was not really anything to worry about on that front. Then Keita added, in the same measured and serious tone, that carelessness in situations like this was particularly risky when the other person involved was as attractive as she was. Ukai was completely caught off guard by the comment and could not find words. Keita gave her a respectful bow, wished her a good night, and walked away. Internally, he was breathing a sigh of relief, knowing how quickly rumors about unwanted advances could start and spread through an office environment. He was glad he had managed to exit the situation as smoothly as he had. A short while later, he arrived at the batting cage, paid his 500 yen entrance fee, and made his way toward the dungeon. What he did not know was that Hikari had been following him the entire time, watching from a distance with barely contained anticipation, already looking forward to whatever footage the night would bring. She had come prepared with a spirit familiar this time, a drone in the shape of a small cat-like creature that she had summoned using her abilities. Her SSS rank stealth skill granted her perfect invisibility, which compensated for the fact that her actual combat abilities were quite poor. The invisible drone would allow her to film her uncle at close range without him ever detecting her presence. Then Keita suddenly stopped and turned, his attention directed precisely toward where Hikari and her invisible familiar were positioned. He had a clear and uncomfortable feeling of being watched. Hikari went rigid with nerves, thinking to herself that his perception was frighteningly sharp. Without warning, Keita swung his metal bat and brought it down just beside her, close enough to make her heart lurch into her throat. He had not made direct contact, but he was clearly sensing something nearby that he could not explain. The bat then came to rest accidentally pointing directly at Hikari's chest. Keita stood there with a genuinely puzzled expression, unable to make sense of the soft resistance he was feeling. He muttered to himself, considering whether it might be some kind of monster, perhaps a slime, and then seemed to arrive at the edge of a different conclusion entirely before stopping himself. Hikari was absolutely mortified, holding her breath and willing herself not to make the slightest sound. Then, at the most fortunate possible moment, a loud and urgent siren blared from deep within the dungeon layer below. Keita's attention snapped away from her entirely. He released whatever he had been probing and moved toward the source of the alarm. Deep in the Shinjuku dungeon, near the border of level 140, the popular adventurer and live streamer Swearin had just triggered a carefully concealed trap hidden inside what appeared to be an ordinary treasure chest. Diamond frogs were now swarming toward her and her team from every direction. Her teammates were spiraling into panic. Even a single diamond frog was considered an exhausting and dangerous opponent, and they were now surrounded by many of them simultaneously. One of her teammates was already convinced they were finished. Swearin refused to let the group collapse and pushed them to keep fighting rather than giving up before they had even tried. The comment section on her livestream was exploding with messages from thousands of viewers watching the crisis unfold in real time. Some of the comments were wildly inappropriate given the circumstances, which irritated Swearin even in the middle of the chaos. One of her teammates had already been seized and bound tightly by a diamond frog's long tongue and was calling out urgently for help. Swearin assessed the situation rapidly and decided to fight back. She drew her sword and unleashed a powerful water-based magic technique, sending a violent and surging torrent crashing into the frogs. It had absolutely no effect. The diamond frogs absorbed the attack without taking any damage at all. Before Swearin could regroup and try something else, a frog wrapped its tongue around her as well and began squeezing with crushing and relentless force. The situation had become critical and there seemed to be no way out. Then, without any warning, a buffed-up Keita appeared directly behind her. In a single instant, the frog that had been crushing Swearin was obliterated and scattered into pieces across the dungeon floor, and she was freed. The comment section of Swearin's livestream went absolutely wild. Keita appeared on the stream as a completely unrecognizable blurred figure, because the platform's built-in AI system automatically distorted the faces and voices of any adventurers who had set their profiles to private, as well as any general users who had not given explicit consent to be shown on a broadcast. But despite the blurring, the image was unmistakable in its outline. A man in a business suit, carrying a metal bat. Every viewer watching and Swearin herself arrived at the same electrified conclusion at exactly the same moment. The Shinjuku batter had just appeared. Keita stood before Swearin and her teammates, having just defeated the diamond frogs. Above them, Hikari's familiar spirit animal carried a camera, broadcasting the scene to an ever-growing live stream audience that had now reached 32,055 viewers. Behind the walls, Hikari was giggling with excitement as the view count continued to climb. She was delighted that she had left a link to her channel in Swearin's comment section, though she found it remarkable that her uncle had managed to run into a top streamer entirely by chance. The interruption of Swearin's stream was sending floods of new viewers straight to Hikari's channel, and she could practically hear the money rolling in. Back at the scene, Swearin and her teammates watched Keita in stunned disbelief. The three of them had struggled greatly against the frogs, yet Keita had handled them with ease. A gem rolled across the ground as Keita wiped the sweat from his face with a handkerchief, casually remarking that the dungeon seemed like beginner-level territory, good enough for some light entertainment. Swearin pushed back against his dismissive tone, and Keita returned her irritation by questioning her judgment. He wanted to know why she had triggered the alarm in the border area. One of Swearin's teammates explained that it had not been intentional. They had simply opened a treasure chest, and the alarm went off on its own. The chest had been completely empty, leaving them just as confused as anyone. Swearin backed up her teammate, insisting that they were the victims in the situation. Keita was unconvinced and pressed her to prove it, reminding her that a place like this demanded constant alertness. Swearin thought carefully about the man standing before her, his absurd level of strength, his metal bat, his plain suit. Then, recalling something he had said, she pointed out that their entire encounter had been captured on her live stream, meaning he could verify their story by watching the footage himself. In that same moment, the pieces came together in her mind. The man in front of her was without a doubt the Shinjuku batter, the powerful figure everyone had been talking about. Keita reviewed what he knew and accepted that the girls were telling the truth, turning his thoughts instead to whoever the real culprit might be. Swearin told him she recognized him, referring to him as the famous strongman making waves lately. Keita brushed it off, calling himself an ordinary person just passing through. Her teammates found that answer ridiculous, pointing out that ordinary people do not wander into dungeons alone. Keita dryly called their assumption a form of prejudice, then politely asked that they keep quiet about his identity during their live stream and respect his privacy. One of Swearin's teammates assured him the stream was already off. The girls then huddled together, whispering among themselves. They noted quietly that Keita actually had a live stream of his own running on the Shinjuku Batter channel, and had even shared the link himself, yet was acting completely oblivious to it all. Swearin whispered back that she did not understand it either, but reminded her teammates that he had helped them, so they ought to stay quiet about it. The others agreed. Watching the girls whisper in front of him, Keita assumed to himself that they were probably calling him a creepy old man. He thought privately that young women were quite terrifying. He also recognized Swearin. Her channel was affiliated with Doom, and her face was well known. His instinct told him that getting any more involved with her would only lead to complications. So he turned and began walking away. Swearin ran after him and called for him to stop. When he turned back, his expression was flat and uninterested. She told him not to look so put out and insisted that she wanted to do something to thank him. Keita responded by laying out a scenario. A bicycle runs a red light. A truck comes speeding toward it, and someone stops the accident just in time. He asked Swearin whether, in that situation, they would be the bicycle that ran the light. She said yes. He explained that a person who reaches out in that kind of moment does so simply because standing by and doing nothing would feel wrong. He saved them for his own peace of mind, not as a favor deserving of thanks. It was all too much trouble. With that, he walked away. Swearin stared after him, visibly irritated. Her teammates shared her frustration, grumbling that strength alone did not give someone the right to talk down to others the way he had. Then, to her teammates' surprise, Swearin's expression softened and a faint blush crossed her face. She muttered that he was actually kind of cool. The contrast between his tired, worn-out eyes and his staggering power had struck her as genuinely impressive. Her teammates immediately warned her not to let her guard down just because the stream was off, reminding her that showing that kind of dreamy expression in front of her fans would spell trouble for her. Meanwhile, Hikari's live stream count had shot up to 51,427 viewers. The comment section was buzzing with praise for the mysterious man who had refused to show his face, with people admiring what they called his style. Others expressed amazement that anyone had actually been able to rescue Swearin. One commenter dramatically declared that if Swearin ended up with an older man because of this, it would be the end of him. But others countered that the man was undeniably strong and had a certain cool quality about him. Hikari watched the flood of comments with a smug smile, thinking it was exactly what she expected from her uncle. Even when a pretty girl approached him, he brushed it off without a second thought. As Hikari took a short rest, something about the trap began to nag at her. She let her mind drift to the way adventurers understood their abilities. When skills were first acquired, they were often explained through an analogy, a tree growing upward. The thick trunk represented the main skill, the core ability that every awakened adventurer had to learn. In Hikari's case, that was stealth at SSS rank, a powerful ability that let her conceal both her appearance and her presence entirely. As a tree matures and branches grow outward, adventurers could develop subskills as they leveled up. Hikari had one such branch in ninja art at B rank, which she was able to shape into a drone-like form. She could even perform something like appraisal on top of that. When she used appraisal on the treasure chest, the viewers in her stream were quick to notice something was off. One commenter pointed out that the chest did not belong in the border area at all. It looked too worn and out of place, more like something from an upper layer of the dungeon. The comment section quickly filled with the theory that someone had deliberately placed it there. Speculation spread rapidly that the whole thing had been a setup targeting Salaryman and her team. Hikari turned this over in her mind and arrived at a troubling conclusion. Someone had attempted what was known as MPK, monster player killing, a method of attacking other adventurers by using monsters as the weapon. The culprit had timed it to coincide with Salaryman's scheduled stream, which made the whole thing feel calculated and sinister. Then an idea struck Hikari. If the trap had been placed deliberately, there was a good chance the person responsible was still lurking somewhere nearby. She summoned another of her familiar spirit drones and sent it out to search the area. A short while later, she broke into a laugh. She had found the culprit. Hikari's familiar spirit drones managed to capture footage of a visibly anxious person her viewers would come to know as Potato, surrounded by his equally panicked teammates who were pressing him for answers on what to do next. Potato had no answers to give them, and was just as rattled, cursing the terrible luck of having drawn such powerful monsters from a deeper layer of the dungeon. Watching the footage on her phone, Hikari was struck by a sense of familiarity. Both she and the viewers in her comment section quickly recognized the group as members of Overworked. Back in the dungeon, Salaryman was still chasing after Keita, desperately trying to catch up to him. She pleaded for him to slow down, insisting she had not yet had the chance to properly thank him. Keita brushed it off without breaking his stride, telling her it was unnecessary. Salaryman refused to let it go and pushed for at least a small gesture of gratitude, but Keita declined again just as flatly. Growing flustered, her face flushing red, Salaryman eventually gave up on the idea of thanking him altogether, but made one final attempt, asking him to at least share his contact information with her. Keita's expression darkened further, and he refused her completely. Salaryman's teammates watched the whole exchange unfold nearby. One of them remarked on what quite a scene it had become, while the other felt a wave of relief that their live stream had already ended, until she paused and realized that the Shinjuku Batter channel was still broadcasting. She stared at the screen, stunned, as the completely oblivious Overworked members appeared on the stream. Listening carefully, Salaryman's teammate overheard Potato fuming that the whole plan had been for them to swoop in as the heroes who rescued Salaryman from danger. His teammates tried to defend themselves, saying it had simply been bad luck with the monsters and that it was out of their hands. Salaryman's teammates were barely containing their fury. The viewers watching the Shinjuku Batter stream also took note. The general feeling in the comments was that Overworked had made a catastrophic mistake, apparently unaware that they were being filmed. Viewers were also quick to spot that one of the Overworked members was still carrying the very same treasure chest that had set off the alarm earlier. Salaryman's teammates rushed over to her and Keita, alerting them that the people responsible for planting the chest were close by and that they intended to go after them. Salaryman took in the information and immediately acted, casting a water magic technique she called Water Mirror. Keita watched with interest, noting that the spell functioned similarly to sonar, sending ripples through the water to map out her surroundings and detect what lay nearby. Salaryman confirmed almost instantly that she had located them. Without hesitation, she launched into a second water spell, calling forth what she named Great Vortex. A massive surge of water erupted and swept over the entire Overworked group before any of them had a chance to react. One of Salaryman's teammates quietly suggested that it might have been a little excessive. Keita studied the spell carefully, observing that it generated a wide, rotating current capable of restraining multiple enemies across a broad area, that it worked in coordination with changes in the surrounding terrain, and that its greatest strength lay in how long it could sustain its effect. He told Salaryman it had been exactly the right move. The praise clearly pleased her. Then, both Hikari watching through the live stream and Salaryman standing beside him noticed a shift in Keita. A heavy, oppressive energy suddenly radiated from him, filling the air around him with a weight that had not been there before. Meanwhile, the Overworked members were thrashing helplessly in the current that Salaryman's spell had thrown them into. Potato raged at the injustice of his situation, yelling at his teammates to find a way out of the area. His teammates, barely keeping their heads above the raging water, pointed out in desperation that escaping was simply not possible. Even with the enhanced physical abilities that came with being an adventurer, the force of the torrent was too much to overcome. Potato snapped at them to be quiet, seething with fury and swearing he would never forgive whoever had put him in this position. Then one of the Overworked members spotted Keita moving toward them through the chaos and called out in alarm. The group had no idea who he was, but Potato did not wait to find out. He ground his teeth and ordered his team to open fire. A volley of magic attacks came flying in Keita's direction all at once. When the smoke and spray cleared, Keita was standing completely unharmed. Every member of Overworked went still with shock. Potato quickly shifted tactics and ordered his team to attack the ground beneath Keita's feet instead. They struck the surface he was standing on, and for a moment it looked as though it had worked. Keita lost his footing and began to fall toward the churning vortex below. But what came next left Potato unable to believe his own eyes. Rather than plunging into the water, Keita simply ran across its surface as though it were solid ground. Everyone watching was struck speechless with amazement. In that moment, a voice surfaced from somewhere deep in Keita's memory. It was the voice of his former boss, a man he remembered with no fondness. delivering what he had called the secret art of working overtime. The memory was an unpleasant one. His old boss had drilled into him that even when the body reached its absolute limit, a person could still keep going as long as they had not yet lost consciousness. The instruction had been blunt and merciless, to keep moving, keep working, right up until the moment the mind finally gave out. The memory continued. His old boss had explained the technique in simple physical terms. The trick was to step forward with the left foot just before the right foot had the chance to sink, then immediately repeat the same with the right. Done continuously, it would allow a person to run across water without ever going under. Keita had always assumed it was nothing more than a metaphor for pushing through the impossible. His former boss had insisted that kept up long enough, it would allow a person to work without end. Now, sprinting across the surface of the churning water, Keita found that the man had been completely right. Even so, compared to the relentless and unreasonable daily grind that job had put him through, running on water felt almost effortless by comparison. Keita reached the Overworked members and came to a stop directly in front of them. The sheer force of his presence drained the color from their faces, and screams rang out around him. Without much ceremony, he swung his bat straight into Potato's face. Then he carried on as though nothing particularly noteworthy had happened. Potato clutched his broken nose, trembling. Swearin hurried over to Keita's side with concern. Keita's expression tightened slightly at the way she addressed him. One of Swearin's teammates leaned close and whispered a quiet reminder that Keita's channel was still live, urging her to watch what she said. Swearin caught herself and acknowledged it with a guilty look. The same teammate glanced around the area, scanning for any sign of the drone that must have been filming the stream. There was nothing to see. She reasoned to herself that whoever was operating the camera for Keita's live stream almost certainly had stealth abilities, and highly advanced ones at that. All of the Overworked members were now slumped against the rubble, and every one of them was visible on the live stream. Swearin stood before them and made clear how serious the situation had been, telling them plainly that she and her teammates could have been killed. Keita then moved and crouched down in front of the group. Potato demanded to know what his problem was. Keita studied their faces closely, and the recognition that settled over him was not a pleasant one. These were the very people whose content had been the source of his endless overtime shifts. The sight of them brought a surge of barely contained anger. His jaw tightened and a heavy, suffocating aura poured off him as he reached out, grabbed Potato by the collar, and hauled him up off the ground. He demanded a straight and honest answer about what they were doing there. Potato scrambled to regain some composure. His eyes darted to something nearby, and he immediately tried to shift the blame, insisting that Keita had the wrong people and that they had done nothing wrong. He then pointed out that Keita had no right to use magic and attack someone out of nowhere, and threatened to take the matter to the guild. That threat quickly gave way to open contempt, as Potato launched into a string of insults, branding Keita the kind of rude, older man who needed to be put in his place. Keita stared at him, inwardly baffled by what he was witnessing. Then Potato hurled his sword at the treasure chest, deliberately setting off another alarm. The viewers in the live stream were furious watching it happen in real time, and the comment section erupted with certainty that Overworked were without question the culprits. The crowd was loudly urging Keita to give them what they deserved. Potato threw his head back and called out to whatever powerful monsters the alarm might summon, taunting Keita and telling him not to get arrogant just because he happened to be somewhat stronger. He kept going, mocking Keita's age and calling him out for what he described as a middle-aged newcomer getting carried away with himself. Keita began counting quietly under his breath, starting at 1. Potato told him exactly where he could go. From the triggered alarm, a monster emerged, but it was tiny, round, and resembled nothing so much as a little peanut. The live stream erupted in laughter, and viewers quickly dubbed it Peanut Boy as it bobbed around throwing miniature punches that posed no real threat to anyone. Potato stared at it, visibly deflated, then tried to recover by claiming the whole thing had been intentional, just a harmless prank. Keita was not buying it. Potato pressed on, trying to reshape the story into something more favorable, insisting the original plan had been to trigger an alarm and defeat the monsters alongside Swearin as a kind of surprise collaboration. Keita, utterly unmoved, noted that what Potato was actually describing was recklessly endangering multiple people's lives for the sake of entertainment. He counted 2. Potato grew more agitated and tried yet again to reframe things, insisting they had always intended to step in and save the day. Through all of it, Keita observed, Potato had not once offered an apology, not even a gesture toward one. Potato, growing visibly nervous, asked if Keita was going to let it go. He admitted the whole thing had been planned and tried to pass it off as a joke, insisting it was nothing worth getting serious about. Keita counted 3, and then sent Potato flying through the air with a full, powerful swing of his metal bat. Afterward, he addressed the crumpled figure with calm and measured words, telling him plainly that causing serious trouble for other people and then acting smug about it was not something that would be tolerated. The live stream audience lost it. Viewers declared that Potato was completely finished, with more than a few comparing it to a home run. Swearin's teammates stifled their laughter even as they quietly worried that Keita might have gone slightly too far and voiced a mild concern that Potato might not actually be alive. One of them turned to Swearin and told her it was time for them to leave. But Swearin was not paying attention to any of that. Her face had gone completely red, and her thoughts were entirely occupied with just how cool the Shinjuku batter was. The following day, at the sales department of the Adventure Book Cooperation, Ukai brought news to Keita that Very appeared to have been expelled. She held out her phone to show him, but Keita kept his eyes fixed on his computer screen and made clear he had no interest in the matter. Ukai filled him in anyway, explaining that Very had made a serious blunder during a live stream, which had ultimately led to their adventurer licenses being revoked and their removal from the guild. The story had spread everywhere and was all over the news. Keita glanced at his own phone and felt a quiet wave of relief wash over him. There was no mention of him anywhere in the coverage. It seemed they had kept their word. His thoughts drifted back to the previous evening in the dungeon. Swearin and her teammates had been talking among themselves, already certain that Very was finished and fully expecting their licenses to be taken away. Hearing that, Keita had gone tense. The thought that he might somehow get pulled into the fallout simply for having been present at the scene was not something he could brush off easily. All he had ever wanted was to quietly enjoy his hobby without any of this kind of trouble. He had turned to Swearin with some hesitation and made a request of her. Swearin had responded with immediate warmth, telling him she would do whatever he needed. Keita asked her plainly that if anyone came asking about what had happened that night, he wanted his name kept out of it entirely. Swearin and her teammates were caught off guard by the request. Swearin agreed without much resistance, then smiled and put forward a request of her own. Whatever she had in mind, it left Keita visibly uneasy. Back in the present, Ukai was bubbling with excitement over the fact that the Shinjuku Batter channel had already surpassed 80,000 subscribers. She expressed her wish that someone like him could work with their company, lamenting that the big-name streamers under Doom consistently ignored them. She had not thought they would ever find anyone capable of filling the gap left by Very. At that moment, a message from Swearin dropped into Keita's inbox. He stared at it with a troubled expression, turning over in his mind what she could possibly be after. He had ended up exchanging contact information with her, and was already bracing himself for the headache he was certain would follow. Ukai noticed the look on his face and asked if he had been spammed. Keita went along with it, describing the message in vague terms as something from a young woman trying to rope him into some kind of dating app scheme and expressing his distaste for it. Ukai lit up with recognition, saying she had received those kinds of messages too. She launched into a story about an idol who had reached out to her asking to be friends, and mentioned that a friend of hers had actually fallen for a scam like that back in junior high. She then asked, in passing, whether Keita used the same messaging app. He said he did, noting it was convenient for keeping in touch with family. Ukai's face brightened further, and she seized on the moment, asking if they could exchange contact information. Keita's expression shifted. He cast about frantically in his head for some way to decline without making it awkward, cycling through excuses and finding none that felt usable. Ukai, for her part, seemed perfectly at ease, even pleased with herself for having found such a natural opening. She had apparently been waiting for a chance like this for some time. Keita's anxiety was climbing steadily when their manager's voice cut through the office, calling both of them over. Keita jumped at the chance and made for the manager's desk without delay, pulling Ukai along with the reminder that they had been summoned. He felt genuine gratitude toward his boss in that moment. When they reached her, their manager looked far from her usual self. Keita took one look at her deflated expression and sensed immediately that whatever was coming next was going to be another problem. Their manager asked whether they had found a replacement for Very yet. Keita told her honestly that it had only been a day and nothing had come through yet. She nodded, then placed a magazine on the desk in front of them. She described the situation as bad, genuinely bad. Keita recognized it as their company's flagship publication. Their manager laid out the problem. Very had been set to feature in an exclusive article, scheduled to run in full color across the center spread starting the following week. All of the surrounding advertising space had already been sold and filled with related merchandise and sponsor content. It had been meant to be a comfortable, well-supported issue. Keita pointed out carefully that content was the editorial department's domain and that their team was in sales. His manager acknowledged it, but explained that the editorial department was already completely buried. She got straight to the point, instructing Ukai to go and make a sales pitch to Doom Pro and directing Keita to back her up on it. Ukai sought to confirm what she had heard. Doom Pro as in Doom Production, the company that managed multiple streamers each with over 1 million subscribers, the undisputed leader in the industry, the same company that Swearin's channel was under. Their manager confirmed it. Ukai then asked hopefully whether they had been given a larger budget to work with. Their manager said no. The budget was as tight as ever. She smiled at the two of them and told them that this was precisely the kind of situation where their skills as salespeople were meant to shine, and that she was counting on them both. Keita and Ukai slowly turned to look at each other. Then they both let out a simultaneous cry of disbelief. Inside the offices of Doom Production, Keita and a visibly nervous Ukai sat across from Kinya Kachidoki, the company's manager. Kinya held a cigarette and regarded them with the air of someone already certain the meeting would be beneath him. Keita introduced himself and Ukai, offered thanks for the manager's time on such short notice, and explained that they had come to propose a collaboration. He turned the floor over to Ukai to lay out the specifics. Kinya gave a brief nod, signaling her to go ahead. Ukai walked him through the full proposal. When she finished, Kinya's reaction was immediate and dismissive. He found it dull and saw no point in any of it, then turned the conversation to what exactly Doom Productions stood to gain from working with them. He questioned the value of reaching the modest readership of their print magazine, and told them plainly to come back only once they had tripled their circulation, pointing out that even their weakest performer already had that many subscribers. Listening to all of this, Keita quietly concluded that Doom Production had never had any genuine interest in working with them to begin with, and that it made a certain kind of sense. Kinya took one more swipe at the idea of print media in general, dismissing it as a relic, before declaring the whole meeting a waste of his time. Then his attention shifted. His eyes landed on Ukai, and something changed in his expression. He mentioned, with a sudden and unsettling change of tone, that there was a party coming up with an important industry figure and a number of live streamers, and that he could arrange for Ukai to attend. He suggested she might have better luck making her case directly to that person, and that if she could put him in a good mood, some work opportunities might open up for her. Ukai, not yet reading the room, felt a brief flash of genuine hope. Kinya moved closer to her and made a crude remark about her appearance, dropping any pretense of professionalism. The implication behind his offer became unmistakably clear as he spelled it out further. The event would take place in a hotel room, just the two of them with the industry figure, and he was not forcing anything, simply presenting the option. He made sure she understood what he was really suggesting, all while maintaining a veneer of plausible deniability. Ukai's unease turned to alarm as the full picture came into focus and she recognized the situation for what it was, a proposition that crossed serious ethical and professional lines. Keita, who had been listening in silence, let out a quiet breath and rose from his seat. He thanked Kinya for the meeting in a tone that was perfectly civil, then guided Ukai toward the exit, keeping a steady hand on her as they moved. Kinya called after them, seemingly annoyed that the encounter was ending before he was ready. Keita paused and, without raising his voice or dropping his composure, turned the conversation in a different direction entirely. He mentioned, in measured and unhurried terms, that social media had made things complicated for streamers with large followings. The risk of being recognized, of something going viral, was a constant concern. He had also heard, he added, that the physical stamina of awakened adventurers was so far beyond ordinary people that it created real difficulties in certain private settings, leading some establishments to turn them away. He then brought up a more recent development, a pattern apparently growing in certain circles, involving former streamers being recruited to escort guests at private hotel events, where unsuspecting participants were pressured into situations they had not agreed to. He mentioned that Shubin magazine was rumored to be sitting on a significant story about exactly this kind of thing, with publication expected within the week. He let the observation hang in the air for a moment, gently wondering aloud whether any of it might involve people connected to Doom Production, and then immediately said to think nothing of it, as though the thought had been nothing more than idle musing. Kinya stared at him, visibly rattled, demanding to know how Keita could possibly be aware of any of that. Keita replied simply that old media still had its connections, then collected Ukai and headed for the door. Ukai, being pulled along beside him, felt heat rise to her face as she watched him. Behind them, Kinya's composure cracked. Furious at having been outmaneuvered so completely and so calmly, he grabbed Keita by the necktie and erupted, throwing his former subscriber count at Keita like a weapon and threatening to destroy him on the spot. When his hand closed around Keita's tie, Keita's own hand moved and caught Kinya's wrist without any particular urgency. Kinya felt the grip tighten and winced at the pressure. Inwardly, Keita registered that Kinya was remarkably weak and found himself genuinely wondering if that was all the man had. He announced that negotiations had clearly broken down and removed himself and Ukai from the room. A short while later, the two of them stood outside the Doom Production building. Ukai expressed deep and sincere gratitude for what Keita had done for her inside. Keita acknowledged it without making much of it, then immediately pivoted to the practical reality. The deal had fallen through, and their editor was going to have a great deal to say about that. Ukai agreed without hesitation. Keita began thinking aloud, already counting off the problems. The Verigud situation had left a gaping hole in the magazine's upcoming issue, and now this. He turned the question of what to do next over in his mind. Above them, framed by the window of his office, Kinya watched their figures below with his jaw locked tight and his palm pulsing with barely contained rage. A man stepped into the office and said something casual, trying to read the mood. Without warning, Kinya backhanded him across the face with full force. The man dropped, and several teeth skittered across the floor. Kinya crouched beside him, licking his fingers with a self-satisfied air and asking the crumpled man whether he seemed like someone to be frightened of. The man, bleeding freely from his nose, immediately said that he understood. He murmured something about a broken front tooth. Kinya told him he would deal with it later, then drove a fist into the man's stomach to shut him up, telling him to be useful as something to hit. With the man spitting blood, Kinya grabbed him by the head and turned his gaze back down to the street below, fixing it on Keita and Ukai's retreating figures. He slammed the man's face into the glass window hard enough to leave it completely unrecognizable. His expression twisted into something cold and vicious as he swore to himself that Keita would pay for this. As they walked through the streets together, Ukai brought up the story Keita had mentioned to Kinya, the one allegedly sitting with Shubin magazine. Keita told her it was still unverified industry gossip at that stage, nothing solid enough to print, but that he personally believed it to be true. The rumors pointed to a pattern of Doom production exploiting women who came to them seeking business opportunities, clients looking for sales pitches, streamers hoping for collaborations, fans trying to get closer to the people they followed, and using those situations to pressure them into sleeping with people in the company. Keita turned the thought over privately, struck by the uncomfortable irony of stumbling across the darker workings of the industry simply by chasing down a business deal. Ukai then turned to him with a slightly different kind of purpose. She asked whether he had anything going on that evening, then gathered herself and invited him out for a drink, framing it as a thank you for what he had done for her earlier. The moment the words were out, she felt a small surge of triumph. She had actually done it, she had asked him. Keita declined, gently but clearly, telling her there was no need for any of that. Ukai pressed a little, insisting that she genuinely wanted to. Keita held his ground, explaining that looking out for his colleagues was simply part of what his job meant to him, and that she had no reason to feel as though she owed him anything. He also mentioned that he already had dinner plans. Ukai's curiosity got the better of her, and she immediately wanted to know whether it was a date or something along those lines. Keita told her it was nothing like that. His sister and his niece had asked him to take them out to eat. Ukai blinked at that, and told him warmly that he seemed like he would make a wonderful father. Keita laughed a little awkwardly at that, and said it was not something he saw in his future. After that, the two of them went to face their manager with the news that the Doom production deal had not come together, offering their apologies. Keita then promptly announced that he was heading out for dinner with his family. His manager stared at him, barely believing the timing. But Keita had effectively sidestepped another night of overtime and was already on his way. At the train station, he realized he was running behind and checked his phone for the details of where they were meeting. Hikari had messaged him earlier to say that her mother would be joining them as well, along with the address. When he saw it, something in him settled warmly. It was the kind of old-fashioned beer hall he had a soft spot for. His sister, he thought, knew him well. He boarded the packed, stuffy train and noted to himself that it was uncomfortably humid, though days like this made cold beer taste all the better. It also crossed his mind that his sister must be doing well financially if she was treating him to dinner in Ginza. He had a passing concern about bringing his niece along to a beer hall, but his sister had always enjoyed a drink herself, so he figured it would be fine. His thoughts drifted happily toward the idea of ordering a king-size beer, and his expression softened into something openly eager. Then, without warning, a hand landed on his shoulder. A man's voice cut through the noise of the train, telling Keita that he had seen what he did and ordering him to get off at the next stop. Keita had no idea what the man was talking about. Neither, apparently, did the short-haired young woman standing beside him on the train. The man shoved a phone screen into Keita's face, showing a video of Keita's distracted, vaguely blissful expression, the one he had been wearing while thinking about beer. The man identified himself loudly as Mamoru, a live streamer who went by the name Pervert Repellent Mamoru and had 38,000 subscribers. In a voice that filled the train car, Mamoru accused Keita of groping the woman next to him, declared that the video was proof, and announced that they were going to the police. Keita, still confused, pointed out calmly that both of his hands had been occupied with other things. Mamoru was not interested in that and shouted that even incidental contact, a smell, the back of a hand, the brush of an arm, was enough to make someone a pervert, and that this was simply common sense. He introduced himself again with evident self-importance and told Keita to present his identification, adding that he had connections with local police officers. The short-haired woman spoke up and told Mamoru clearly that she had not been groped and that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Mamoru dismissed her, suggesting that victims sometimes did not even realize when it was happening to them. He pushed his phone toward her, wanting her to look at the footage and agree with his conclusion. She told him bluntly that he was being a nuisance and asked him to delete the video. Mamoru refused indignantly, insisting he was acting in the interest of society and that something like this could not simply be overlooked. He told her to leave it in his hands. She had no words left for him, only barely contained anger. Keita exhaled quietly and sent a quick message to Hikari letting her know that something had come up and he would be late. Mamoru immediately rounded on him, demanding to know who he was contacting and telling him not to do anything independently. Keita, still unhurried, asked Mamoru to lower his voice, noting that all the shouting was frightening the young woman. He then turned politely to the short-haired girl and asked if she would be willing to get off at the next station with him so they could speak with the station staff together. He explained that he had not touched her and that her testimony would mean a great deal. She agreed without hesitation, telling him they would sort it out. Mamoru, however, had already decided the situation was no longer useful to him. He bolted from the train at the next stop, shouting a dismissive farewell and hurling one last accusation at Keita as he fled. Keita called after him, but Mamoru was already gone. Around Keita, the other passengers had drawn their own conclusions. Whispers circulated through the car. People called him disgusting, said he looked the type, muttered that men with that kind of face were almost always guilty of something. Some talked about taking his photo to warn others. Keita stood in the middle of it and noticed something that felt off. The hostility was spreading too quickly and too uniformly, as though the people around him were moving in coordination, ignoring everything that contradicted the accusation and pushing the narrative in one direction. The thought occurred to him that some of them might have been planted, that the whole thing might have been a setup designed to frame him. The only person who came to mind when he thought about who might orchestrate something like that was Kinya. The short-haired woman said something that suggested she had no clear idea why someone like Mamoru would have come after her specifically. Keita told her it had likely been a coincidence, that he himself had been the target, and that what had just happened was a form of retaliation aimed at him. She thought for a moment and then reasoned that if things continued to escalate, it could become genuinely complicated, and suggested they exchange contact information just in case. Keita hesitated noticeably. After a brief pause, he agreed that she was right, and they exchanged details. The short-haired woman noted to herself that he had seemed really reluctant about it. Some distance away, at a convenience store, Hikari read Keita's message and wondered what kind of trouble her uncle had managed to walk into this time. She hoped he was all right. As for the part about her mother joining them, that had been a small invention on her part. Hikari allowed herself a satisfied smile. Tonight, she had decided, it was her turn to do something nice for him. The table was covered with food and cold beer, and Hikari cheerfully prompted her uncle to raise his glass. Keita drank deeply and with genuine pleasure, his face lighting up with contentment. Hikari watched him with a happy expression, glad that he was enjoying himself. She told him he had been working hard lately, and that tonight he deserved to drink as much as he wanted. Keita was genuinely touched by her thoughtfulness. Privately, he reminded himself that he was supposed to be a responsible adult, but the memory of what had happened on the train earlier was still sitting uncomfortably in the back of his mind, and it made him want to keep drinking. He was already on 2 counts in his silent tally. He pushed the thought aside, telling himself that this was a special occasion and that it could wait. He looked around and asked Hikari where her mother was. Hikari flinched slightly before composing herself and offered the explanation that her mother was still at work, but had left money so that the two of them could order whatever they liked. Keita said there was no need for her to go to such lengths when she was so busy. Hikari felt a wave of relief that her uncle had accepted the story without question. To herself, she acknowledged that this dinner was entirely her own gift to him, paid for with her own earnings. Keita mentioned that he had been curious for a while about what exactly his sister did for work. Hikari said she did not really know the full picture. Her mother did not share much about it, only that she was some kind of artisan who worked with handmade goods. Keita found that answer more puzzling than satisfying. The fact that his sister was keeping the details of her work from even her own daughter struck him as genuinely suspicious, and he quietly wondered what she was really up to. He told Hikari warmly that it had been a long time since they had been able to sit and talk like this, and asked how school was going and whether things were well with her. Hikari found the question endearingly predictable, exactly the sort of thing an uncle would ask. Keita acknowledged that it was perhaps a little old-fashioned, but said he was sincerely curious. Hikari laughed and told him honestly that things were going really well. She had made friends, found something she genuinely enjoyed doing, and felt like her days had real meaning to them. Keita was visibly pleased to hear it, and asked what she had been keeping herself busy with lately. Hikari's mind scrambled for a safe answer. She could hardly tell him the truth, that she had secretly started a live stream channel built almost entirely around filming him, and that it had accumulated tens of thousands of viewers. She was still working out how to respond when Keita's phone lit up on the table. Hikari pointed it out to him. He glanced at the screen and saw it was his manager calling. He considered his beer, drained the rest of the glass, and was briefly tempted to ignore the call entirely. Hikari told him firmly that he had to answer it. He listened to her and stepped aside. His manager opened by apologizing for the late hour and then came directly to the point, asking whether he had groped someone. Keita's expression darkened. She explained that a streamer running a channel dedicated to catching gropers, someone who called himself Pervert Repellent Mamoru, had posted a video making that exact accusation against him. She noted that none of the videos on the channel were particularly persuasive in general. Keita confirmed that there had been an incident, though it had only happened about an hour ago. His manager said the timing was all a little too neat. She went on to tell him that while his face had been blurred in the video and nothing in the footage pointed clearly to his employer, the post had somehow, despite attracting almost no views, been specifically flagged and directed toward the company's own social media account. Someone had sent a direct message to the company informing them that one of their employees had been accused of sexual harassment and asking how the company intended to respond. Keita absorbed all of this in silence, clearly shaken. He told his manager that he believed he had been set up and apologized for the trouble it was causing. She asked him plainly who he had managed to make an enemy of, because this did not fit with anything she knew about him. Keita smiled a little at that. He asked if she trusted him. His manager said that Keita's instinct for self-preservation had always far outweighed any other impulse, and that she could not picture him doing something as reckless as groping a stranger on a train. Keita found a quiet comfort in how well she read him. She added that the whole operation felt too carefully constructed to be the work of someone small and opportunistic acting alone. Keita agreed, saying that while it was still only a guess on his part, he suspected someone with considerably more resources and motivation was pulling the strings behind it. His manager said that given everything that had happened recently, only one name came to her mind. Keita said it too, Kinya Kachidoki, the manager of Doom Production. Keita's manager was furious. She vented her disbelief that the largest company in the industry had made a deeply inappropriate proposition to one of their own sales representatives, been turned down, and was now responding by going after them. She found it incomprehensible that a grown adult in a position of power would behave that way. Keita told her he agreed entirely with her assessment, but pointed out that without evidence, they needed to think carefully about how to proceed. His manager took a breath and acknowledged that he was right, though she added that he seemed far too calm about the whole thing. She told him they would go over their options properly the following morning and that he should not be late. Keita mentioned that he had already taken some early steps. He had the contact information of the woman from the train, and the two of them had already spoken with station staff. As a starting point, it was not nothing. His manager agreed that the video itself had little real evidential weight and had not spread far enough to do serious damage, meaning there was no reasonable basis for holding him responsible for it. Keita asked her directly whether he could take that to mean the company would not be moving toward any disciplinary action against him. She confirmed it, telling him she trusted him. His manager made clear how she felt about people who use sex as a bargaining chip in business dealings, and equally about those who tried to weaponize social justice movements for their own petty ends. She had nothing but contempt for both. Keita offered to come back to the office if it was needed. She told him not to. He was having dinner with family, and he should enjoy the rest of his evening. She even apologized for interrupting before ending the call. Keita thanked her. He stood alone for a moment, phone in hand, turning the situation over in his mind. The post had been deliberately vague, a blurred face, no identifying details, nothing that could be traced back easily. He figured the people behind it had kept it minimal precisely because they knew the evidence was too thin to survive any serious scrutiny, and that going after someone like Mamoru through legal channels would likely be more trouble than it was worth. He thought, not for the first time, that people who operated this way always seemed to know exactly how to protect themselves while causing maximum damage to others. He let out a sharp sneeze of pure contempt for the whole lot of them. A nearby waiter noticed Keita standing there and nervously tried to get his attention, visibly unsettled by the suffocating weight radiating off him. Keita's thoughts had darkened further. Being framed was one thing, but they had dragged his company into it, put his colleagues in an uncomfortable position, and carved up what was supposed to be a rare, quiet evening with family. By his private count, he had reached 3. When he returned to the table, Hikari looked up and immediately went still. The change in him was stark. He had tensed up completely, and a grim, heavy energy surrounded him. She asked nervously what had happened and whether everything was all right. Keita put on a smile and told her everything was fine, but the smile did nothing to reassure her. She watched as he lifted his glass and downed a generous amount of beer in one long swallow, then admitted that there had been a small problem at work. Hikari was on her feet almost immediately. She told him not to worry about her. She would take a taxi home, and he should go handle whatever needed handling. Keita told her that was very thoughtful of her and pressed some money into her hand. She tried to refuse, reminding him that this dinner had been meant as a treat from her and her mother. Keita insisted, saying he wanted to make up for cutting her gesture short, and told her to keep whatever was left over as spending money. She tried again to push it back, but he was already heading for the door and not listening. Hikari watched him go and felt a sudden certainty take hold of her. She pulled out her phone, opened the Shinjuku Batter official channel, and posted a breaking announcement. The Shinjuku Batter would be going live tonight for an intense batting session. The response in the comments was immediate, with viewers flooding in and saying they had been waiting for exactly this. Hikari kissed her phone with satisfaction and immediately flagged down the waiter for the bill. She did not know the details of what had happened, but she had made up her mind. She was not going to let her uncle face whatever this was alone. At the batting cage, Keita paid for his time. The owner greeted him and quoted the usual rate. But Keita had not come for the usual session. His mind was still burning with the image of an industry figure who coerced people into sleeping with him as the price of doing business, and a streamer who made a living manufacturing false accusations to destroy people's reputations. The kind of people, he thought, who made one genuinely question where they kept their brains. He told the owner that tonight he would not be using the batting cage. Instead, he was heading to the Incubus Palace, and he intended to beat every last one of those lust-driven monsters into the ground. The Incubus Palace is a dungeon built to look like the red light district of Shinjuku's Kabukicho. One theory holds that space and time warped and folded together, blending the old red light district with a dungeon to form this strange and twisted place. It was especially chaotic during the dungeon disaster, and a great many people lost their lives there. Because of that dark history, the area carries a unique and particularly dangerous quality, even by the standards of the Kabukicho dungeon, which is already overrun with monsters and demons born from sexual desire. The monsters roaming the dungeon were calling out for the types of people they craved: average-looking men, large and heavy businessmen, men in casual boyfriend shirts, men in white dress shirts with their sleeves rolled up, and men in dorky glasses. When Keita arrived and came face to face with a demon driven entirely by sexual obsession, the creature immediately fixed its attention on him, drawn to his large and muscular build. Keita attacked without hesitation. He struck the demon with enough force to send it crashing hard into a nearby building. Afterward, he stood there calmly and reflected that it was a satisfying outcome, like a good fireworks display. He felt there was nothing quite like sending a sex-crazed creature flying. All the stress he had been silently carrying from his corporate life, abuse of power from above, shady and corrupt business dealings, sexual harassment in the workplace, false accusations of groping on trains, and every other kind of ugly nonsense, had been piling up inside him for a long time. The dungeon was where he came to release all of it. Nearby, Hikari was watching from a safe distance, hidden behind her SSS-ranked stealth ability. She was far too frightened to lower her guard and deactivate it. The demons that inhabit the Shinjuku Incubus Palace are a particularly difficult class of enemy. They cut incoming physical damage by more than half and resist magic on top of that. Anyone unfortunate enough to be defeated by them will be subjected to sexual acts, with no regard for the victim's gender. While Hikari was focused on watching her uncle, she failed to notice that one of those demons had quietly moved up directly behind her. By the time she became aware of it, Keita had already launched himself toward her and delivered a brutal strike to the demon's most vulnerable area. The demon let out a pained groan as the blow connected. Hikari reacted loudly in shock and surprise, though she quickly reassured herself that her uncle was far too strong to be in any real danger. A loud boom followed shortly after. The live stream Hikari was running captured everything, and the viewers watching it left a wave of comments. Some found Keita's visible frustration funny and wondered if something bad had happened to him recently. Others sympathized, saying that riding crowded trains had been uncomfortable lately. One viewer jokingly suggested Keita must be acting out of guilt over something, which confused the others. Hikari thought to herself that her uncle really was extraordinarily powerful. For the viewers watching, simply knowing he was not in any danger of dying was enough to put them all at ease. Keita continued his assault on the demons, going after those who had used positions of power to coerce others into sexual favors. Another loud crash rang out through the dungeon. Viewers reacted with excitement in the comments, saying the whole thing looked thrilling to watch and that Keita must be feeling a great release of tension. One viewer even sent a large super chat donation of 10,000 yen, which Hikari enthusiastically acknowledged with thanks. After clearing out the monsters, Keita stood still and quietly surveyed the area around him. Hikari turned her attention to the stream comments and thanked everyone for their support, especially for the generous donation. She felt grateful to have such loyal viewers following along. The channel had already reached monetization, meaning ads were now running during the stream. She thought warmly about how, once she had earned enough money, she intended to hand it all over to her uncle so he could finally leave his stressful job behind and live out his days streaming alongside her. She smiled quietly to herself at the idea. Then, without any warning, a bright flash lit up the air above and something came hurtling down to the ground. It was a spear. Keita stared at it, unsure of where it had come from. A moment later, the spear discharged a massive sphere of force in all directions. Keita threw himself into the air just in time, narrowly avoiding the blast. Rather than retreating, he made a swift decision and struck the energy sphere directly, producing a deafening roar of sound on impact. The explosion disrupted Hikari's live stream and cut it off entirely. She was stunned and alarmed. Her viewers immediately flooded the chat with worried questions, asking whether the drone had been destroyed and whether the man they had been watching was in trouble. Most seemed confident he was too powerful to be in any real danger and pleaded for the stream to come back. Hikari's mind went to a more personal worry. She began to wonder if her uncle had finally worked out that she had been streaming him all along. When the dust and debris settled, the spear that had landed on the ground was no longer there. It had returned to the hand of a woman who was standing directly behind Keita. She moved with speed and slashed at him, but Keita was already on alert and managed to dodge the swing. Their weapons met and locked together with a clash, and Keita called out sharply for her to stop. The woman immediately went still. The two faced each other. The woman's expression became troubled when she took in the fact that Keita was a human being. She lowered her head and offered an apology, saying she had not expected to encounter anyone else in that part of the dungeon. Keita responded calmly, asking only that she pay closer attention to her surroundings before acting. Hikari remained hidden nearby and took in the whole exchange without making a sound. Her SSS stealth was still active, and it appeared her uncle had no idea she was there. She figured that her familiar spirit drone had been caught in the area of attack from a moment ago, which explained why the stream had cut out. What puzzled her more was the identity of the woman standing before her uncle. This was no ordinary person. She was a top-tier dungeon streamer on the same level as the renowned Salaryman, a platinum-ranked female streamer celebrated as the single strongest physical solo attacker currently active. The woman was Senna, a spear dancer and a streamer with over 1 million subscribers. Senna the spear dancer is the brightest star of Doom production. Unlike Salaryman, whose public life is fairly well known through social media and mainstream coverage, Senna keeps her private life completely hidden from the public, which makes her an enigmatic and enormously popular dungeon streamer. Her latest music video had already crossed 300 million streams, and she was performing the theme song for a major movie. She is known as a lone genius who never forms parties with other adventurers and refuses tips even during dungeon quests. Despite her music and promotional videos going viral regularly, she never runs ads or monetizes her content, choosing instead to rely solely on merchandise and music sales as her income. Hikari could not understand what someone of Senna's caliber was doing in a place like this. She quickly realized, however, that this was an incredible opportunity. Her uncle had already collaborated with Salaryman, and now here was Senna as well. Something like this would absolutely go viral. Her uncle was going to become a legend. She decided to restart her live stream right away, though she was careful to blur Senna's face and mute their conversation to avoid getting herself into trouble for broadcasting another major streamer without permission. Her familiar spirit drone hummed back to life. Keita seemed to notice something faint in the air, though he could not quite place it. The stream came back online, and the viewers immediately flooded the chat with relief and excitement. Several of them recognized Senna even through the heavy blurring, and the comments exploded in disbelief. Hardcore fans began sending large super chat donations in a frenzy. Keita and Senna exchanged a few words. Keita asked whether he should simply treat her earlier attack as an honest mistake. Senna told him it was, apologizing and explaining that her eyesight was poor and she had mistaken him for a monster. Keita pointed out that being struck by a legendary weapon could very well have killed him and asked her not to do it again. It is worth noting that the weapons adventurers carry are mostly items found within dungeons, which tend to produce the same items in large quantities. Those that can be replicated are sold through guilds. However, some weapons cannot be reproduced with any modern technology. Ever since the dungeons first appeared, adventurers have been hunting desperately for what are known as legendary treasures. The spear Senna carried was one such legendary weapon, named Gi Balg the Destruction. Keita put the pieces together. This woman was almost certainly Senna, one of the highest-ranked streamers in Doom production. He thought he had seen her on a popular New Year's Eve music program. He quietly hoped she was not currently streaming, and looked around to reassure himself that no one else was nearby. He then turned back to the matter of her eyesight. Wondering why she did not simply wear glasses or contact lenses to correct it, he pressed her on the point. She replied that she was afraid they might break during a fight. Keita heard her answer and immediately concluded she was lying. Without further warning, Keita launched a swift attack at her. Senna managed to block it and was pushed back, skidding to a stop. Her expression shifted into something far more serious. What followed was a rapid and intense exchange. Senna launched a flurry of successive slashes and quick movements, pushing Keita onto the defensive. She attacked again and again with speed and precision. The viewers watching the stream were stunned by the sudden shift. They watched in awe as the spear dancer and the so-called Shinjuku batter clashed at a level far beyond ordinary dungeon combat. The exchange ended when Senna swung her leg at Keita, who smoothly repositioned his bat and brought it to a precise stop just in front of her face. Senna went completely still. When the dust settled, Keita calmly withdrew his metal bat. Senna stared at the bat and noted that she could sense no magical power coming from it at all. She was shocked to learn it was simply a rental item from a batting cage, a completely ordinary commercial product. She remarked that her legendary weapon would weep knowing that something so mundane had been enough to stop her. She asked if his technique was rooted in some form of staff martial arts. Keita told her it was not. He explained that he was simply doing impressions, mimicking movements he had seen in movies and manga, practiced alone during late-night overtime breaks at work. There was a kung fu film he was particularly fond of, and it had become the foundation of how he moved in a fight. Senna was genuinely taken aback. Before she could dwell on it further, Keita brought the conversation back to the more pressing matter. He made it clear that he knew she had been lying about her poor eyesight. Keita had noticed something specific and telling about the way Senna fought. She kept her eyes closed throughout the entire battle. This was why she could not distinguish between a friend and an enemy in front of her. When Senna asked whether he had actually attacked her just to confirm this observation, Keita explained that the first strike he had thrown was one that required a reaction far faster than normal sight could process. He acknowledged it was not really his place to get involved, but he could tell she had her reasons for fighting the way she did. He then said something more personal and serious. He pointed out that many people assumed adventurers had no real fear of death because they always revived after being killed, leading others to treat their lives as disposable. But dying was still terrifying. regardless of whether the body recovered. The spirit could be broken even when the body was not. He had seen many people end up that way. The fear of death, once deeply experienced, never truly leaves the mind. Being completely overwhelmed and crushed by a monster far more powerful than yourself was a kind of terror on an entirely different level. If she continued the way she was going, that outcome would find her eventually, even if not today. He disliked giving unsolicited advice to people he barely knew, but he said he would regret staying silent. Senna received his words graciously and thanked him. She then opened up and told him the truth. She was genuinely too frightened to open her eyes during a fight. Her main combat skill was something called the Mind's Eye, a skill so rare and without equal that it had been classified beyond the normal ranking system, placed in a special category known as EX rank. When she activates it, her perspective lifts above her body, allowing her to perceive the world around her as though watching herself from a third-person viewpoint, much like a video game. It also sharpens her reflexes and reaction speed dramatically, making everything feel as though time itself has slowed down. Keita remarked that it sounded extremely useful, noting it would also work well against stealth skills. Senna confirmed that through this ability, she could detect any stealth skill up to a rank without fail. Hikari, who was hidden nearby listening to all of this, quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Her own stealth skill was ranked SSS, safely beyond Senna's detection range. Senna went on to explain that she had acquired this skill 18 years ago, when she was just 4 years old. Keita recognized the timing immediately. 18 years ago was the dungeon disaster. Senna described what had happened that day. She had been separated from her parents when a horde of monsters came pouring out of the dungeon and flooded the city. A swarm of goblins chased her down through the streets. One of them seized her and slashed at her eyes with its claws. She screamed in agony as more goblins closed in around her, surrounding the small and helpless child. Then a man appeared. He was tearing through the monsters with fury, cursing aloud at what they had done and at himself for not arriving sooner. He gathered the injured little girl into his arms, covering her wounded eyes gently with a handkerchief. He spoke softly to reassure her, promising to protect her no matter what, though he mistakenly referred to her as a boy. He fought off the monsters, tracked down a healing potion for her injuries, and eventually brought her to safety at a nearby shelter. Even now, all these years later, Senna found herself wondering where that man was. He had saved her life when she was on the very edge of death, and she had never been able to find him again. Keita asked what had become of her parents after that day. Senna caught herself, apologizing for having poured out her past so unexpectedly. She assured him that despite everything, both of her parents had come through safely. Keita felt relief at hearing that. When Senna turned the question back on him and asked about his own experience that day, Keita gave a quiet and subdued answer. He said only that he had gone through a difficult time as well, surviving but unable to help anyone. In his own mind, the memory was heavier than he let on. He had reached the shelter where the child he had brought there was being kept, only to find that monsters had attacked it. He had arrived too late. He had not been able to save even one child. He gripped his metal bat tightly as the thought passed through him. Senna, however, told him she was glad he had survived. She smiled at him, a warm and genuine smile, and Keita was visibly caught off guard by it. She then told him the real reason she had become an adventurer. She had been searching for the person who saved her that day, wanting to find him and thank him properly. After reuniting with her parents, the chaos of the aftermath had made it impossible to locate the man again. She had thought that if she became famous enough, he might eventually see her and reach out on his own. Keita said he understood. Senna added that ever since that day, monsters had filled her with a deep and paralyzing fear. She could not make herself fight them with her eyes open. Working alongside other people was also beyond her, because she could not coordinate with them properly, but on her own, she could manage. Keita gently pushed back, pointing out that she had still picked up on his skill with impressive speed. Senna said it was more of an instinct than anything else. He acknowledged again that it was not really his business, but he said it plainly. Someone had gone to great lengths to save her life, and that person would be deeply saddened if something happened to her now. He added, with a touch of self-deprecating humor, that seeing young people get hurt was hard on him because he was a sensitive old man. Senna smiled again. She found herself thinking that he was a genuinely interesting person. She asked him what he was doing in a place like this, and he told her it was simply his hobby. He came there to practice his batting. As he spoke, something tugged at a distant part of her memory. His face reminded her of someone. She also recalled a man she had briefly seen on the train earlier that day, though that man had not looked nearly as physically imposing as Keita. She told herself Keita probably just had one of those common, familiar-looking faces and let the thought go. Back on the live stream, the viewers watching the blurred and silent footage could tell the two were in conversation but had no idea what was being said. They left comments expressing how happy it made them just to see the two of them looking lively and well. Another large super chat donation came in. Some viewers speculated that Keita was giving the girl some kind of lesson. Hikari, watching from her hiding spot, grew a little anxious. The conversation between the two had gone on pleasantly enough, but with the faces blurred and the audio muted, the viewers had nothing concrete to react to. She worried that without something more engaging happening, the stream might lose momentum. Before she could think of a solution, everything was interrupted. A man's voice rang out sharply, calling for everyone to stop. A man stepped forward holding a camera, and Keita turned to face him, wanting to know who he was. A man stepped forward and introduced himself as Dan, a freelance cameraman who had been hired to handle Senna's shoot. The viewers watching the stream immediately recognized him and erupted in excitement. Dan was well known in the dungeon content world, though mostly behind the scenes, a highly regarded professional who specialized in promotional and music videos rather than live streaming, preferring the higher pay and the creative freedom that came with the ability to edit his work. He was also noted by viewers as being fully Japanese despite his distinctive appearance. Some viewers in the chat marveled at how others seemed to know so much detailed information about him. Dan greeted Keita warmly and expressed his admiration, noting with genuine surprise that he had never expected to meet someone capable of holding his own alongside Senna. When Keita asked whether Dan was recording the encounter for a live stream, Dan firmly dismissed the idea. Live streaming was not his world. He was an artist, and the lack of editing left him no room to work with. Senna explained that Dan was a videographer she trusted deeply, the person she always turned to when shooting her music videos. Keita remarked that it took real courage to operate a camera inside a dungeon of this nature, having assumed Dan would rely on a drone from a safe distance. Dan assured him he was more than capable of handling himself in a fight. Senna then formally introduced herself to Keita and explained the purpose of their visit. She and Dan had come to shoot a music video for her new song. The original plan had called for her to perform alongside a newcomer who was on the verge of making their debut. Keita expressed surprise that any newcomer could be on a comparable level to Senna. Dan burst out in exasperation. No such newcomer existed, and the whole arrangement had been dreamed up by executives who had no real understanding of what dungeon combat actually involved. He was a freelancer, though, and speaking up against those decisions would have cost him work immediately. Senna noted warmly that losing Dan would have been a serious problem for her, as there was simply no one else with his level of skill. Dan thanked her, but good-naturedly suggested she should try working with other videographers occasionally. Dan then vented his frustration over the fact that the scheduled newcomer had not even been able to make it as far as the Incubus Palace. Keita remarked that it sounded like the kind of unreasonable demand that comes from management completely disconnected from the reality on the ground, something he was personally very familiar with. Senna noticed that Keita seemed to relate to the situation a little too well, and quietly wondered whether something unpleasant had recently happened to him. Dan confirmed that the newcomer had retreated long ago and was likely sitting somewhere outside with a cup of tea. Dan then turned to Keita with a bold and earnest request. He asked if Keita would be willing to step in and appear in the promotional video instead. He pressed his palms together and appealed to him directly, saying he was certain that with Keita involved, it would be the finest promotional video he had ever produced. Keita's expression made his reluctance immediately obvious, and Dan acknowledged it before regrouping and offering a more formal proposal. The viewers on the stream were desperate to see what face Keita had made, and several large super chat donations came flooding in from fans who wanted a look. Dan laid out the terms properly. Keita's name would appear in the official credits, and Doom Production would compensate him. Before he could even finish mentioning the financial details, Keita cut him off. Money was not the issue. He simply did not like being in the public eye. Dan quickly adapted his offer. He proposed keeping Keita's face and name out of it entirely, replacing his likeness with a CGI character while preserving only his movements. He also offered to keep Keita's involvement hidden from the company and pay him directly out of his own pocket. Keita was uncertain, visibly taken aback that Dan was willing to go to such lengths for someone who was not even affiliated with Doom Production. Dan was completely sincere. He said he would spend every last penny he had for the chance to capture Keita and Senna performing together, and that this was simply what it meant to him to be a serious professional. Senna then turned to Keita and added her own quiet but earnest request. She told him that with him as a partner, she could fight at her absolute best. With the originally scheduled performer, she would have had to hold back considerably, and she refused to compromise the quality of her work. For the sake of the people waiting for her song and her performance, she wanted to give everything she had. Keita adjusted his glasses and thought it over. He glanced at his watch and pointed out, in a very matter-of-fact way, that his bat was a rental from a batting cage, 500 yen per hour, with only 30 minutes remaining on it. Senna apologized for having taken up so much of his time. Keita resolved the matter simply by announcing he would clear the rest of the dungeon in the time he had left, and he stepped forward without further discussion. Senna lit up with excitement. Keita added casually that he wanted no payment. They were welcome to follow along and film whatever they liked. Dan was immediately energized and got straight to work, deploying his automated interception, background music, and recording drone swarm system, a setup he called Albacore, and declared everything ready to go. As they moved into the dungeon together, music began to play. Keita mentioned that he liked the song and asked if it was new. Senna confirmed it was, clearly pleased. Keita noticed that the music seemed to have some kind of strengthening effect. He could feel his energy rising. The monsters came at them, and Keita dispatched them swiftly and cleanly with each swing of his bat, sending them crashing away. He found the sound deeply satisfying. Senna laughed beside him, genuinely amazed that she could go all out without holding anything back. Keita told her simply to do exactly that. Senna raised her spear, and a large magic circle materialized in the air above her. She unleashed a powerful attack she called Emerald Crush, and enormous shards of emerald rained down from above, driving into the monsters below. Keita found himself privately amused. Here he was, an older man completely swept up in the thrill of pairing up with a talented young woman who had personally invited him to fight alongside her. It was embarrassing to admit, even to himself, but he had not been able to bring himself to refuse her. He genuinely admired people who took their work seriously and gave everything to it, and he simply could not help but respond to that quality in others. Senna and Keita moved in sync, both caught up in the rhythm of the music as they fought. At one point, Keita lifted Senna and launched her into the air, where she unleashed another Emerald Crush from above. The stream viewers were tracking everything closely. Someone noted that the two had cleared the second stage in exactly 13 minutes, drawing admiring reactions. Others pointed out that a well-known company executive had previously taken 8 hours with a party of 36 people to get through the same area, though one commenter suggested that had been staged to make his party look worse on purpose. Viewers marveled at Keita's strength and lamented that a man that powerful still had to go to work. Others celebrated the fact that Senna's new song was being heard live for the first time through the stream. More large donations came in. Hikari was stunned by how quickly everything was spreading. It was already going viral. Inside the Incubus Palace, Keita and Senna pressed deeper in. When they looked up, they found themselves face to face with the dungeon's boss, a massive demon looming above them, gripping a vehicle tightly in its claws. A loud creaking sound filled the air. Keita and Senna turned to look at the source. The vehicle the boss had been gripping was still running, its engine straining and its wheels trying to push forward. The massive demon boss jolted and let out a thunderous roar. The viewers watching the stream erupted in the comments, expressing shock and frustration at the sudden appearance of such an enormous and powerful boss. They noted that the area around it was surrounded by a poison swamp, making it an especially miserable battlefield. Getting anywhere near the creature seemed nearly impossible from where they stood. Keita checked in with Senna, and she confirmed she was ready. The boss roared again, and the trapped vehicle's wheels screamed against the ground before a loud crash rang out. Viewers were pessimistic in the comments, saying the unstable terrain made the boss practically unbeatable. Others placed their full confidence in Keita. As the smoke and chaos settled, Keita could be seen having quietly slipped around to the back of the boss. He struck it hard across the back with his metal bat, and the enormous creature crashed to the ground. The stream viewers held their breath, asking each other whether it was over. It was not. The boss began to rise again. Senna wasted no time. She leaped rapidly from one piece of debris to the next and unleashed her legendary spear's power in a concentrated attack directly to the boss's head. The creature roared in agony and retaliated by breathing a massive wave of fire. Keita barely managed to counter it, and the screen filled with flames. Viewers frantically asked each other whether the fire had caught him. When the smoke began to thin, a shoe stepped out from the edge of the flames. Keita had survived, and he calmly stated his observation, that even something as formless as fire has a core at its center. Senna and Hikari were both stunned. The stream comments went wild. Viewers reacted to the sound of his voice coming through the audio filter, with some losing composure entirely. Large super chat donations poured in. Others watched in amazement as the flames appeared to be gathering and compressing, being pulled together rather than spreading outward. Keita dragged his bat along the ground and swung with full force. He announced that if a person could strike that core, they could knock absolutely anything out of the game. He called out the name of his technique and sent the compressed flames flying. The captured fire condensed into a small concentrated ball as it left his bat, then grew larger and larger as it closed the distance toward the boss. At the same moment, the vehicle the boss had been holding came roaring back to life, its engine revving as its wheels turned, and it lurched forward on its own. Keita struck its wheels precisely, redirecting its path straight toward the boss. Senna launched herself high into the air at the same moment, and by the time the boss looked up at her, it was already too late. The vehicle and the ball of compressed power collided with the boss simultaneously and erupted in a massive explosion. Jewels and coins rained down from above as the dust and smoke swallowed everything. When it cleared, the boss was gone. Dan burst out in celebration, declaring it the finest thing he had ever filmed and calling the two of them absolutely extraordinary. Keita quietly straightened his glasses. Senna turned to him and asked for his name, realizing she had never properly learned it. Keita acknowledged he should have introduced himself sooner and told her to call him K. Senna found the name charming and playfully suggested it might be short for the word for kitty. Keita clarified, it was written with the Chinese character for firefly, creatures that burn brilliantly and briefly before going dark. Senna said she did not like that interpretation, even as a joke. Still, She turned to him with a sincere and quiet expression and thanked him deeply. It had been a performance she would never forget. Keita smiled. The familiar spirit drone hummed nearby. Hikari was stunned by what had just unfolded. The stream comments crashed in like a wave. Viewers praised the extraordinary quality of everything they had just witnessed, begged for the blur on Keita's face to be removed, and reacted with barely contained emotion to the warmth between Senna and Keita. Large super chat donations came pouring in from Senna's devoted fans. Someone pointed out that what they had all just watched was essentially the behind-the-scenes recording of Senna's brand new music video. More donations followed, with viewers expressing genuine gratitude for having been shown something so special. Hikari could barely contain herself. Their subscriber count had surged past 140,000. Senna's reach and influence had made all of it possible, and the super chat numbers were unlike anything she had seen before. She whispered to herself in pure delight, quietly thanking both her uncle and Senna from the bottom of her heart. Deep inside the Shinjuku Kabukicho dungeon, at the respawn point, the three of them walked together through a quiet area. It was late at night, so very few other adventurers were around. Dan remarked that the place always reminded him of a particular fountain square back in the Kansai region, and that it carried a somewhat melancholy atmosphere. Keita was mildly surprised to learn that Dan was from Kansai. He thanked both Dan and Senna for helping him gather the item drops from the floor, which he referred to simply as trash pickup. Dan found the phrasing bizarre. He had never heard anyone describe collecting dungeon loot that way before. Senna asked Keita whether he was truly comfortable dividing the collected items evenly between them, given that he had done nearly all of the actual fighting. Keita said it was fine and took his leave. As he walked away, Dan remarked to Senna that Keita was either entirely without greed or simply very strange. Senna marveled quietly at how much everything they had collected was likely worth. The laws surrounding dungeons were still far from settled at this point in time. Questions about who legally owned the land where dimensional distortions occurred had not been resolved. Monsters and the treasures they dropped did not technically belong to anyone under the law. In the many gray areas that remained, items picked up by adventurers were generally treated as their personal property, though no one could say with certainty when or how the laws might change. Even selling all of those drops would likely yield no more than 1,000,000 yen at best, hardly enough to sustain a person for the rest of their life. To legally convert dungeon items into cash, a person had to be registered as an adventurer, and doing so would violate his company's rules against holding a second job. Keita had weighed all of this in his mind. He had once tried listing a dungeon item on an auction website, only to have it flagged as fraudulent and his account banned. To him, practically speaking, the items were little more than worthless clutter. He made his way to a large donation box set up for victims of the dungeon disaster. He deposited the city-designated garbage bag full of dropped items into it, feeling a little guilty about using a garbage bag for the purpose, but reasoning that it would at least cover the disposal fee. He quietly asked for forgiveness in his own mind and moved on, unaware that he had been observed. Hikari, still concealed under her stealth skill, had witnessed the whole thing and was baffled. She thought it was an enormous waste to simply donate all of those items, and briefly entertained the idea of sneaking them back home for herself. Two other women nearby had also seen what Keita did, but had drawn an entirely different conclusion. They assumed he had been littering, throwing trash carelessly into the donation box, and were deeply offended. One of them pulled out her phone and reported the incident to the relevant organization, describing it as someone dumping garbage in the donation box using a city-designated bag. She was surprised when the person on the other end of the call said they would come immediately. An older officer arrived shortly after, slightly out of breath. After confirming the two women were witnesses, he went straight to the donation box and unlocked it with his key. He reached inside and pulled out the bag, holding it open to show the two women its contents. It was filled to the brim with gleaming dungeon items. The officer was moved. He explained that tonight's donation was an exceptionally generous one, and that the organization was deeply grateful. He went on to say that this same person had been making large anonymous donations ever since the dungeon disaster 18 years ago, and that from occasional sightings over the years, they knew the donor was an older man, likely an adventurer who had lived through that terrible event firsthand. The organization had given him a quiet nickname among themselves, Daddy Garbage Bag, a play on the classic story of the anonymous benefactor known as Daddy Longlegs. The two women were stunned and deeply embarrassed, realizing how badly they had misjudged the situation. Hikari, listening from her hidden position, thought the nickname was hopelessly uncool, but felt a powerful swell of pride for her uncle. The following morning, Keita arrived at his sister's home looking worn out and heavy. Akari, his older sister by 2 years and Hikari's mother, noticed immediately that he seemed exhausted and asked whether he had slept properly. Keita explained vaguely that something unexpected had come up, though he was relieved to have the next 2 days off. When Akari pressed him for details, he gave her a brief account. A business visit had gone badly when the person he met lost his temper at him, and on the way to meet Hikari afterward, he had narrowly avoided a false accusation of groping on the train. Akari was surprised to learn he had been meeting with Hikari, having heard nothing about any such plan. At that moment, Hikari appeared cheerfully, playing the role of a server and presenting coffee with a flourish. Hikari told her to drop the theatrics and asked directly why she had arranged to meet Keita without mentioning it. Hikari offered an innocent explanation. She had simply thought it would be nice to take her hard-working uncle out for a proper meal every now and then. Hikari pointed out that she herself had not been invited, which she made clear she did not appreciate. Keita let slip that he had been under the impression the outing had been Hikari's idea to begin with, which immediately put Hikari in a very awkward position. Faced with her mother's questioning look, Hikari shifted tactics and appealed to emotion. Her mother was always so busy with work, and all she had wanted was to show her uncle some appreciation for everything he did. She asked with wide, teary eyes whether that was really such a terrible thing. Neither her uncle nor her mother could bring themselves to scold her after that. Hikari told her gently that lying was still wrong, but that if Hikari simply told her about these plans in the future, she would make sure to be there. Keita told Hikari warmly that her kind words meant a great deal to him, but that she really did not need to worry. He was perfectly fine. Hikari apologized, quietly relieved that the moment had passed without too much damage. Her attention then turned back to what Keita had mentioned about the false groping accusation. When Keita recounted the story in more detail, Hikari was immediately furious. The idea that anyone would make such an accusation against her uncle struck her as completely absurd and unforgivable. Keita calmly told her to settle down. Inside, Hikari was seething. This was the same person who had been quietly donating to dungeon disaster victims for 18 years. The accusation was beyond ridiculous. Keita reassured both of them that the matter was already being handled, and that he had exchanged contact information with the actual victim from the incident. Hikari felt this was far from sufficient and insisted the situation needed to be taken more seriously, warning that someone willing to make false accusations could cause trouble again at any time and place. Hikari agreed completely. Keita thanked them both and told them not to worry. To himself, he felt a quiet and genuine warmth. This was what family was. They believed in him without needing to be convinced of anything. Hikari, however, was not about to leave it alone. She picked up her phone and found a video from a streaming channel dedicated to exposing gropers, and fired off a message to her friend Mia, explaining that her uncle was in trouble and asking her to look into it. Mia replied that she was already on it. Hikari was resolved. She was going to protect her uncle no matter what. Hikari looked over and told her firmly to put the phone away while they were eating. Hikari was completely set on protecting her uncle from whoever had made the false accusation against him. She sent a message to her friend Mia asking for help and offering to do anything in return as a trade. Mia's reply gave Hikari a moment of pause. The open-ended nature of the agreement suddenly made her nervous about what Mia might end up asking for. Before she could dwell on it, Hikari reminded her to put the phone down and focus on the meal in front of her. Hikari apologized and made a light excuse about being unable to resist checking her social media. Keita remarked warmly that it was wonderful to be young, and that he envied Hikari for being so at ease with that kind of thing. Hikari, still chewing her food, casually told him she thought he would actually do very well on social media. He was entertaining and people would enjoy him. Keita brushed it off, saying he had nothing worth showing anyone. Before the conversation could go further, his phone buzzed, and he stepped away to take the call. The call was from someone at his workplace. The matter had nothing to do with the groping incident. Instead, Keita was told that Kachidoki, a key figure at Doom Production, had personally requested a meeting with him. Kachidoki claimed he wanted to apologize for his recent behavior and make amends. Keita was immediately unenthusiastic about the idea. His instincts told him the meeting would be unpleasant, and he had no idea what Kachidoki was actually planning. His boss acknowledged that it might have been more appropriate to let his lawyer handle it, but the order had come directly from the company's CEO. Keita was expected to go, lower his head, and do whatever it took to save the business deal. Keita pointed out that being ordered to grovel under those circumstances sounded very much like workplace power harassment. His boss quietly agreed but told him there was no real way around it. She added that if Keita refused, she herself would likely face consequences, though she doubted the company would actually survive losing the deal in the first place. The meeting was set for Monday, 2 days away, and she would send him the details by email. The call ended. Hikari noticed Keita's expression when he came back and asked if everything was all right. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. Hikari commented lightly that he seemed to be a very popular man that morning. Keita said dryly that being popular at work only made him feel worse, not better. He looked at the caller's name and stepped away again without another word. Hikari immediately made to follow him, but Hikari told her to sit back down and finish eating. She reminded her daughter gently that Keita was a capable adult and that Hikari needed to trust him. Hikari sat back down reluctantly, fidgeting and wondering who he was talking to. The second call was from Swearin, the famous adventurer streamer whose real name was Swearin Shiratama. She was seated somewhere with a burger in front of her, along with 2 companions named Rindo and Amazuru who were also eating. Swearin had already heard about the confrontation between Keita and Kachidoki through office rumors. Apparently word had spread that a salesperson from Adventurer Book Company had gotten into a fight with someone nicknamed Doki. which Keita quickly figured out was Kachidoki's old adventurer nickname. Swearin warned Keita that Doki was a genuinely dangerous person and urged him to be careful. She explained that Doki had an unusual philosophy. He believed in starting relationships through conflict and considered a one-on-one fight the proper way to form a bond with someone. Beyond that, whenever things did not go his way, he had a habit of luring people he had grievances with into the dungeon. Keita was baffled that someone like that had not been fired. Swearin explained that Doki had connections to someone in a powerful position at the company. Amazuru added that the rumor among office staff was that it was less about connections and more about blackmail, that Doki appeared to have compromising information on someone influential, which was how he continued to get away with everything. Swearin also mentioned that Doki reportedly had a streamer working under him who performed citizens' arrests and helped suppress any problems before they could become public. Keita connected the dots. The false groping accusation on the night of his confrontation with Doki was almost certainly not a coincidence. Swearin apologized and confirmed she suspected the same thing. She offered to speak to people higher up on his behalf and even suggested they could work together on the project. Keita thanked her sincerely but turned her down. It sounded like getting involved could put her at risk too, and he was not willing to let that happen. Swearin muttered something quietly about how Keita had already collaborated with Senna and how it did not seem fair, but Keita had already moved on in his thoughts and did not catch it. His mind was already working on the problem. His company could not afford to go under right now, and he was in no position to change jobs. He had been out of the job market so long, he had genuinely forgotten how to fill out a resume. He had to handle this himself. He told Swearin that since he was going to be summoned by Kachidoki on Monday and would almost certainly be dragged into a dungeon, he intended to settle things the straightforward way. Swearin began to offer help again, but Keita stopped her by explaining what he actually did for a living. He was in sales, and sales, he explained plainly, was essentially the work of putting one stubborn older man in a room with another stubborn older man. There were selfish ones, cowardly ones, unpleasant ones, and occasionally decent ones, but almost none of them, despite their age, behaved like real adults. Swearin told him that description was slightly alarming. Keita continued, saying that salespeople were, by the nature of the job, a fairly unsavory breed, but even unsavory people had to do their work, or the world would not function. Swearin asked whether being dragged out by what sounded like hired muscle and roughed up could really be considered part of the job. Keita said that as long as it happened during working hours, it was fine, and told her not to worry about him. Swearin pushed back, saying she still wanted to recommend him and help him get recognition for his work. Keita asked her not to mention his name. If he got credit for things tied to her reputation and ended up being promoted, he would only find himself in a hollow management role with more responsibility and less actual pay. He grumbled briefly about the bleak reality of how workplaces operated. After a short pause, Keita asked Swearin whether she knew Senna personally. Swearin said of course she did, though they did not spend time together outside of work, something she said she would genuinely love to change. Keita told her that he had happened to meet Senna the night before and had received a business card from one of her staff. He planned to ask Dan to pass along a message to Senna on his behalf. Swearin's expression shifted slightly. She asked Keita what exactly he was planning. Keita told her simply that on Monday he intended to get the whole thing resolved as quickly as possible and handle it the old-fashioned way. The call ended there. When Monday arrived, Keita walked into Shinjuku Station and took stock of his surroundings with calm, practiced eyes. He noticed a man nearby carrying what appeared to be a guitar case, almost certainly concealing a sword. Another man nearby was likely hiding a weapon of some kind as well, probably a hammer. Keita checked his watch. It was exactly 7 in the morning. He had put in a full day at work that morning and afternoon, and both his boss and his colleague Ukai had been visibly anxious about him before he left. He appreciated their concern, even if he did not show it. The 2 men positioned near the entrance were almost certainly there to block any attempt he might make to turn and leave. Keita kept walking. He anticipated that the real danger would come from behind, and right on cue, a voice from behind called him a pervert. A moment later, something sharp pressed against his side. He was being kidnapped in broad daylight, with no attempt at subtlety whatsoever. Keita immediately began acting, crying out loudly in distress, drawing attention. The man behind him told him harshly to be quiet and to keep moving. The group began walking together, with Keita playing the part of a frightened, helpless victim. A surveillance device nearby switched on and began recording. The man behind him told him to pick up the pace. Keita continued his performance, wincing and complaining loudly that he was being hurt. Underneath it all, everything was unfolding exactly as he had planned. The group continued walking until they reached a dark alley. Keita noticed what appeared to be a secret dungeon gate, one that the guild had no knowledge of. If that was the case, whatever happened to anyone who passed through it would never be discovered by anyone on the outside. This was clearly how these people operated. Keita understood with cold clarity that they genuinely intended to kill him. They descended into the Shinjuku dungeon, reaching the zone spanning levels 15 through 20, and continued down a hallway until they came to a stop in front of a door. Inside the room, a man was waiting for them. He introduced himself as Doki Kinya and told Keita that the collaboration he had come seeking would be settled through a one-on-one fight between the two of them. Keita responded with open contempt. The man behind him, Mamoru, immediately grabbed Keita by the collar and bristled with anger. Mamoru declared that he had once been a live streamer with over 127,000 followers, insisting that made him someone worth respecting. Keita, completely unfazed, pointed out dryly that Mamoru had simply purchased those followers from a reseller. He went further, noting that Mamoru had retired under a cloud of financial scandal after abusing his position of authority within his team to swindle members out of money when selling them dungeon drops. His former teammates had eventually exposed him publicly, bringing the whole thing crashing down. Keita delivered all of this with the same flat, unimpressed tone. Mamoru snapped and punched Keita in the face. Keita registered the blow internally and noted that it was far too weak. He felt he had provoked Mamoru adequately, though perhaps not quite enough. He made a deliberate show of it anyway, dramatically rolling across the floor and groaning, curling up and playing the part of a frightened, helpless victim who had no idea why any of this was happening to him. Inside, he was entirely calm and focused. All he needed now was for Doki to start talking about his motives, and they would have everything they needed as evidence. Doki spoke up, and what he said was revealing. He said that Keita's attitude was precisely what he could not stand. Keita had stood up to him at his office, yet here he was now, letting himself get knocked around by someone as weak as Mamoru. It disgusted him. He told Keita to get up. Doki then struck Keita himself, hard enough to knock his glasses to the floor. He grabbed Keita by the collar and looked at him with something between fury and unease. He said Keita was like a monster wearing a human face. Even now, taking hits and cowering on the floor, there was not a trace of genuine fear in his eyes. The look on his face made clear he could end things whenever he chose to. Keita thought to himself with mild surprise that Doki was more perceptive than he had given him credit for. For someone at a mid-level position in the streaming world, that kind of reading of a person was actually quite sharp. Doki declared that since they were both men, they would settle the matter properly in a one-on-one fight. He even framed it as the beginning of a friendship. He drew his weapon, a flambe sword, which radiated intense heat. Mamoru flinched at the warmth coming off it. When Keita calmly asked what would happen if he simply refused, Doki answered without hesitation that he would kill him. He charged forward. Keita activated his main skill, Water Magic SSS, Megaton Pump. A massive surge of water exploded outward from him, slamming into Doki and drenching him completely. Keita noted to himself with quiet satisfaction that the allied army mode built into the skill was designed to prevent friendly fire, meaning everyone on his side was left completely untouched by the area of effect. Doki spluttered and coughed up water, staring at Keita in complete shock. At that moment, the others appeared. Amazuru stepped forward and announced that everything, the kidnapping, the assault, the unlawful detention of a civilian, had been recorded in full. Every second of it was captured as evidence. Rindo added that what had taken place constituted serious criminal conduct. Then a familiar and striking figure stepped into the room. It was Swearin. Doki was visibly shaken to see her there and demanded to know what she was doing, turning on Keita with the realization that the whole thing had been orchestrated from the beginning. Keita straightened his glasses and confirmed it plainly. He noted that even dungeons, largely ungoverned as they were, had limits. What had occurred inside this dungeon, the abduction and assault of a civilian, was the kind of thing that could not be protected by adventurer privileges once it became known to the outside world. Mamoru tried to reframe everything, insisting that they had simply been dealing with a known pervert and appealing desperately to Swearin to believe him. Swearin turned to another figure in the room instead. That person stepped forward and flatly stated that Mamoru was lying, that he had fabricated the entire accusation. Mamoru recognized her as the plainly dressed young woman from the train incident and demanded to know what she was doing there. The young woman transformed. The unremarkable, modestly dressed figure that Mamoru remembered from the train gave way to reveal Senna Meizono, the same woman who had been presented to the public as a victim of sexual harassment and who was known to the world as Senna the Spear Dancer. Both Mamoru and Doki were stunned. Doki turned on Mamoru with immediate fury, unable to believe he had targeted someone like Senna of all people. Mamoru stammered in disbelief, saying there was absolutely no way he could have known that the ordinary-looking woman on the train was Senna. He felt completely deceived. Senna noted simply that she preferred to keep her private life separate from her public one. Keita adjusted his glasses and reflected quietly to himself that the shock was entirely understandable. He had been stunned himself when he first put the pieces together. He never would have imagined that the two were the same person. It was a remarkable twist of fate, and as it turned out, an extremely useful one. Adventurers, he had come to understand, could possess what was known as an avatar, an alternate outward appearance. There appeared to be limits to how drastically different an avatar could be from the real person, but even knowing that, the transformation was far beyond what anyone would reasonably expect to see through. Senna glanced at Keita with a slightly suspicious look, as though sensing she was being thought about in an unflattering way. Keita told her it was nothing of the sort and moved things along briskly. He straightened up and allowed his full physical presence to come through. The broad, powerful build that his ordinary office worker appearance had kept carefully concealed. Doki and his men stared. The suit, the muscles, the realization crossed their faces all at once. Could this be the Shinjuku batter? Keita let out a long breath and relaxed his posture, admitting with dry humor that he had been straining to hold in his stomach the entire time and that it was genuinely tiring at his age. Senna stared at him, momentarily thrown by the fact that this was apparently the thing on his mind at that moment. She remarked to the other women that Keita struck her as more of a con artist than anything else. Rindo and Swearin agreed without hesitation. Keita turned his attention back to Doki and reminded him of his earlier declaration, that he had wanted to settle things one-on-one. Doki immediately began backpedaling, claiming he had said no such thing and that in any case, he would never have gone through with any of this had he known who Keita actually was. Keita pressed the point calmly. All four women spoke up at once to confirm that yes, Doki had absolutely said it, and they had all heard it clearly. Doki had nowhere to go with that. Swearin asked Keita where his bat was. Keita told her he had not brought it, and that he did not need it. His bare hands were more than sufficient. One of Doki's men, a white-haired man, stepped forward at this point, apparently deciding to take matters into his own hands. He mocked Keita openly, scoffing at the idea that anyone could win a fight without weapons or gear while showing off in front of a group of women. He asked sarcastically whether Keita would object to them using their weapons. Keita told him to go right ahead. In fact, all four of them were welcome to come at him at the same time. The white-haired man drew his sword and announced the activation of his main skill, Lightning Sword B, and followed it immediately with a declared sub-skill attack. He never got to use it. Before he could finish, Keita stepped forward and punched him directly in the face. Keita remarked flatly that less talking and more action would have served him better. Mamoru stood nearby in stunned silence. Rindo noted that the blow had been brutal. Swearin, curious, asked Rindo, who had significant karate experience, having ranked 4th in the National High School League, to explain what technique Keita had just used. Rindo told her plainly that whatever it was, it existed on an entirely different level from anything she could classify. Keita turned to the next man without pause. That man, apparently more composed than the others, acknowledged Keita's speed and strength and reached for what appeared to be a wine bottle, but was actually a weapon carrying water and cold air elements, designed to be effective against physically durable opponents. He announced that no amount of speed or power would matter once Keita was frozen solid. He never got the chance to throw it. Keita had already closed the distance and struck him across the face before the attack could be launched. Keita said only that the man had been too slow, and reminded them all again that they should have come at him together from the start. When Mamoru saw what had happened to the second man's face, he broke down completely. He abandoned any pretense of fighting and began pleading desperately, insisting he had only acted because Doki had pressured and provoked him. Keita observed that Mamoru had lost the will to fight and told the others to restrain him. Rindo did so with visible annoyance. Doki stared at Keita and tried to make sense of what he had just witnessed, asking whether Keita was some kind of karate master. Keita told him he had only dabbled in it briefly because his older sister had been passionate about it. By his own assessment, he was nothing more than an amateur. Swearin turned to Rindo and asked for her honest assessment. Rindo said that Keita's raw physical strength was on a completely different plane, comparable, she said, to being punched by a superhuman, the kind of blow that would drop almost anyone instantly. Swearin asked Rindo point-blank whether she was saying Keita was simply the strongest. Rindo noticed the pleased look spreading across Swearin's face and asked her what she was so smug about. Now it was just Keita and Doki. Keita faced him directly and waited. Doki charged. He activated the full force of his flambe sword skill and commanded it to reduce everything in front of him to ash. The women stood back and watched. Doki told himself that it did not matter who this man was. There was no way he could withstand a fire attack with his bare hands and no equipment. The attack never landed. As it closed in on Keita, it simply stopped. The fire compressed and gathered into a tight sphere in Keita's hands, and the room went completely silent with shock. Keita explained what he had done with calm precision. Fire in its natural state is formless heat, untouchable and impossible to grasp. But when fire is shaped into something like a blade, it takes on a defined edge, and anything with a defined edge can be physically intercepted. Formless fire is harder to deal with because it requires finding and reaching the core of it. What he had just performed was something he called a circular block, a technique he had read about in a manga years ago, one that he had tried out of curiosity and found worked remarkably well. He noted it was effective against arrows, firearms, and flamethrowers as well. Doki could not process what had just happened. It was simply beyond the boundaries of anything he understood to be possible. Keita steadied himself and focused. He recalled being told once to visualize drawing a line in the direction he wanted the force to travel. He pulled back and hurled the compressed sphere of captured fire forward with everything he had, naming the throw after a batting technique. A full-speed fastball at its most advanced level. He also recalled being told that as someone who fought with two hands, he had to commit to the throw completely. The sphere hit Doki dead center. Doki was thrown back, coughing up blood, and crumpled to the ground. Keita looked down at him quietly. The women behind him were completely speechless. After a brief pause, Keita turned to them with a calm smile and suggested they all make their way to wherever Doki was set to respawn. At the respawn point, Doki came back to life in a deeply disoriented state, curled up and calling out for his mother like a small child. Keita observed that he was alive, which was the important thing. He then took a moment to explain how the dungeon revival system worked. Every adventurer inside a dungeon is wrapped in something called an avatar, a kind of duplicate body constructed from magical energy. When an adventurer takes damage inside the dungeon, it is the avatar that absorbs the hit and gets destroyed in their place. When death occurs, only the soul experiences it while the physical body remains entirely unharmed. The full recovery that happens at the respawn point follows from that same principle. Doki continued calling out for his mother in a dazed, childlike state. Keita said he was genuinely relieved Doki had come back in one piece. Senna was not entirely convinced that Doki was truly alright, given the state he was in. Keita explained that what Doki was experiencing was simply a temporary shock reaction that sometimes followed revival after death in the dungeon. He would return to normal within a day or two. Keita added that pointless violence always left him feeling hollow and dissatisfied. It was something he genuinely disliked. Senna pointed out that he had been smiling quite a bit throughout the whole affair, which somewhat undermined his stated distaste for it. Keita moved on to the practical matter of what to do with the men who had been restrained. He asked whether he could leave their handling entirely to Doom Production. The Tide men objected loudly. In his own mind, Keita acknowledged that handing them directly to the police would have been the more straightforward choice, but doing so would have meant subjecting himself to a lengthy police inquiry about everything that had taken place inside the dungeon. Beyond that, since the scandal involved people from within Doom Production itself, making it a public matter would inevitably cause damage to people who had nothing to do with any of it. People like Swearin and Senna, who had helped him. He did not want to repay their kindness by dragging them into something messy. His reluctance had nothing to do with any concern about being caught sneaking into dungeons without authorization. Swearin told him the company's CEO had already been informed, and that he could safely leave the men in their hands. Senna added that they would make sure proper care was arranged for past victims, and that the streamers who had assisted in illegal activities would face appropriate consequences. Keita turned to Mamoru directly and told him to delete the video containing the false groping accusation, and to personally apologize to and compensate all of the people he had previously falsely accused. Mamoru agreed without resistance. When he reached for his phone to check his channel, however, he found it had already been banned. The shock on his face was complete. As a streamer, his career was finished. Keita remarked that while Mamoru certainly deserved it, the timing of the ban was surprisingly sudden. Senna wondered aloud whether other victims might have already reported Mamoru to the guild. Still, a full channel ban was not a punishment handed out lightly. It required solid evidence and a serious formal report to bring about. Swearin confirmed as much. Keita found his thoughts drifting back to the breakfast that morning, when he had told Hikari about the false accusation, and she had immediately grown furious and started tapping away at her phone. He dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it came. Hikari was just a normal teenager. It could not have been her. Swearin led the group outside and toward the exit. Rindo immediately announced she was hungry and suggested they all go eat somewhere together to celebrate. Amazuru agreed enthusiastically. Rindo turned to Keita and Senna and invited them along. Senna looked to Keita to see what he thought. Keita said that since everyone had been so helpful, he would treat them all to a meal. Swearin thanked him warmly. Keita did add one condition. However, he asked to be seated at a separate table, with communication happening by text message when necessary. Swearin pointed out that this rather defeated the purpose of going out together as a group. Keita said simply that he had a strong aversion to being perceived as some kind of wealthy older man showering a group of young women with hospitality. He said it with a satisfied grin. Swearin was visibly offended. They all headed out together. What none of them knew was that Hikari had been there the whole time, hidden just out of sight. She got on the phone with Mia and asked if she could join the celebration. Mia said there was no reason why not, on the condition that Hikari treated her the next time they went out. Hikari agreed without hesitation, saying she would make sure to spare no expense for her. Mia then asked whether Hikari had been filming and whether she was planning to upload anything. Hikari said no, she knew better than that. Mia expressed genuine surprise, saying Hikari was far more sensible than she had given her credit for. Hikari pushed back with mild indignation. Mia replied that Hikari was charming enough, but was absolutely the last kind of person she would want as a family member. Hikari was outraged. Mia then asked whether Hikari was planning to keep it a secret from her uncle that the two of them were the ones responsible for getting Mamoru's channel banned. Hikari said she would have loved to tell him, but there was simply no way to explain how they had done it, because what they had done was, in practical terms, a crime. She had tracked down Mamoru's home address through his social media posts, gone there, accessed his laptop without permission, and gathered evidence from it. She had broken into his home. Hikari told herself it was justified given the circumstances, a matter of social justice. Mia dryly pointed out that this reasoning was essentially identical to the logic Mamoru himself had used to justify his own behavior. Hikari had no immediate response to that. Later, the group gathered at a place called Royal Hall and settled around a table. Swearin said frankly that Keita was quite a remarkable and unusual person. Keita told her he was simply an ordinary office worker, the kind you could find absolutely anywhere. Senna said his definition of ordinary was clearly very different from everyone else's. Swearin agreed and pointed out that for a start, ordinary office workers did not have streaming channels. Keita looked genuinely confused. Swearin was stunned. She asked if he was really telling them he did not stream. Keita looked back at her with the same baffled expression, apparently having no idea what she was referring to. Chapter 21 begins with Surin questioning Keita about whether he is the person behind the Shinjuku Batter account. At that moment, Hikari suddenly appeared and greeted her uncle, acting as though running into him was a complete coincidence. Sato was visibly startled to see Hikari there. Hikari played it casually, and when Surin asked Keita who the girl was, he introduced her as his niece. Hikari then pretended to be surprised as she recognized Swearin and Senna. Senna tried to deny that Hikari knew her, but Hikari pointed out that while Swearin's makeup was different, her face was the same. Hikari then revealed that she was also a streamer and a fellow professional, pulling out her phone to show them her channel, which had 1,504 subscribers. In her head, she was pleased with herself for pulling off what she thought of as a ninja technique for changing the subject and steering the conversation away from dangerous territory. Keita then stood up and walked away a little to refill his drink, telling the girls to enjoy themselves and not mind him. In his thoughts, he reflected that it never ends well when he gets involved in conversations between young women, and that he simply wanted to drink his beer in peace. Swearin turned her attention back to Hikari and asked her directly whether she was the person running the Shinjuku Batter account. Hikari was caught off guard and tried to deny it, even letting out a small whistle, but Swearin told her that her whistling was so unconvincing that it proved nothing. Swearin sighed and remarked that it made sense Keita was completely unaware of what was going on. Senna was shocked to learn that Hikari had been streaming without her uncle's knowledge. Swearin called it a betrayal, saying it was wrong to sneak around and expose him without his permission. Senna pressed further, asking whether Hikari had simply been using Keita for her own benefit. Hikari was flustered and quickly insisted that was not the case, and that she was not using him at all. The girls challenged her to explain how it was any different. Before Hikari could answer, Swearin noticed that Keita had quietly returned and was standing nearby. Hikari anxiously asked her uncle how long he had been listening. Keita looked at Hikari calmly and simply asked whether she was causing any trouble for anyone else. Hikari replied that she was not. With that, Keita told her that it was fine then, and that whatever she was up to, she was welcome to use him however she needed. All the girls were completely stunned by his reaction. Swearin pressed him, asking whether he truly meant that, pointing out that he did not even fully know what Hikari was doing. Keita responded that he did not feel the need to dig into every detail, explaining that his reason was simply that he loved his family. He went on to say that he did not care if Hikari was using him or living off his money. He told her that if she wanted a house, he would give her one, and that he would even provide her an allowance. As long as it made his family happy, none of it bothered him. Swearin remarked with amazement at just how devoted an uncle he was, and Keita gave a small laugh. Swearin then admitted that she felt foolish for getting so worked up on his behalf. Keita acknowledged that she had been angry for his sake and told her he was grateful for it. Swearin, clearly flustered, covered her face and told him he sounded incredibly corny. But Senna and the others watching him were quietly moved, thinking to themselves that Keita was remarkably cool. Swearin then turned to scold Hikari, pointing out that she was trembling even though Keita had been completely forgiving toward her, and told her that she needed to say something to him. Hikari responded by tearfully declaring how much she loved her uncle. Watching all of this, Swearin could not help but feel a quiet pang of jealousy, thinking to herself how wonderful it must be to have a family like that. Keita then gently asked Swearin if he could ask about her parents. She explained that she only had her mother, and that she had lost her father 18 years ago. Hearing this, Keita fell into his own quiet thoughts. He reflected on how much the world had lost 18 years ago, and how he himself had not been able to save a single person back then. He could only hope that these young people would be able to live happily in a world that old and weary men like him had failed to protect. The following day, the CEO was in high spirits as he walked with Keita, laughing and saying he could not believe that Doom Production had officially requested a collaboration. He went on about how this would bring great content to their pages, how their company was now secure, and praised what he saw as Keita's remarkable talent. Keita quietly stopped him and complimented him on doing well. Shortly after, Keita's manager called and spoke to him. She made it clear that the CEO's version of events was completely off the mark. The real reason Doom Production had reached out was not because of Keita's sincere approach at all. Ukai was surprised, having assumed Keita had handled things directly through negotiation. The manager clarified that everything had actually been resolved because of the scandal involving the Kasadoki and Mamoru channels. In exchange for keeping the matter confidential, Doom Production had proposed the collaboration as a form of hush money. Because of that arrangement, the Kenya incident never became public knowledge. However, word of other crimes had eventually started leaking out anyway, and in the end, Kenya was removed from Doom Production entirely. Mamoru and the other individuals involved appeared to have simply disappeared. Keita quietly thought about how frightening it was that Doom Production had clearly pulled strings behind the scenes, and he wanted no further involvement in any of it. Ukai, still not fully understanding the situation, insisted that Keita deserved credit for the outcome and said she intended to make sure others knew it. Keita immediately asked her not to do that. Ukai argued that his hard work would go unrecognized, but Keita brushed it off and said he was perfectly fine with letting others misunderstand. Ukai let out a sigh. Keita simply smiled and said he had no interest in credit that was only half-heartedly given. Ukai thought to herself that this was so typical of Keita, and it was one of the things she truly admired about him. With the situation resolved, the magazine appeared to be safe for the time being, and Keita thought he could finally take a breath and relax. But then his manager called him over again. She told him about a new project involving Doom Production and informed him that, by direct order from the CEO, Keita himself would be put in charge of it. Keita could only think to himself that this meant even more work ahead. Keita jolted awake and sat up in his bed, grabbing his head. Outside his home, 3 men had gathered. They confirmed to one another that the house in front of them was their target for the night. One of them looked around and remarked that the place appeared run down and unlikely to hold anything of value. But the one wearing a black helmet dismissed that concern entirely, telling the others that what they were after was far more worthwhile than gold. The one wearing a black cap was monitoring something on his phone and had his eyes on Akari. He was visibly surprised, noting that despite being over 40 years old, she still had a striking figure and was not bad looking for a woman her age. The one with the black mask chimed in, suggesting that Akari's daughter looked far more appealing to him, and questioned whether Blackcap was really focused on the right target. Blackcap then laid out his reasoning to the group. He argued that risking one's life going into dungeons was a foolish way to make a living. Targeting ordinary people who had not yet awakened any abilities was completely safe and carried no danger. On top of that, it came with both money and women. The others agreed and elaborated further on their scheme. Their plan was to kidnap a girl and force her into a dungeon by making her kill a goblin, which would cause her to awaken as a dungeon adventurer. Once she had awakened, she would always respawn no matter what happened to her, meaning they could do whatever they pleased with her without any legal consequence. Black Helmet summed up the logic coldly, saying it would be idiotic not to take advantage of a system like that. There was simply nothing to lose. The narrator described the situation plainly. If dungeon streamers and modern heroes represented the light of the great adventure era, then what these 3 men were about to do was its complete opposite. This was pure darkness, an incident involving shady criminal activity carried out by adventurers who were abusing their abilities solely to satisfy their own greed and desires, and it was just on the verge of happening. After crossing through the gate and landing on the ground near the house, one of them mentioned that there was apparently a man living there, but that he was just a thin old man and would be easy to deal with. Blackcap added that an old man like that was probably sitting on a decent amount of savings. Black Helmet agreed and said they would torture him until he gave up his account passwords and then drain everything he had. The 3 of them stood outside the entrance. Black Helmet placed his hand on the door and activated his thief skill to pick the lock. The door made a creaking sound, but when they pushed it, it would not open. There was a moment of silence before Blackcap grew impatient and demanded to know why something as simple as a house door was taking so long. Black Helmet was confused and muttered to himself that something felt wrong, wondering whether there was some kind of magic barrier on the door. Then a voice came from above. Kato was standing on his balcony, looking down at the 3 of them and asking in a calm voice whether that was all of them. The intruders looked up and recognized him as the old man they had been told about, the one their commander had said to rough up. Black Mask decided they would deal with Kato first and take care of the women afterward. Kato gripped an iron handle and asked them to repeat what they had just said. The 3 men immediately felt a chill run through them. Blackcap was unsettled, recalling that their commander had told them the old man was just an ordinary person with no abilities. Black Helmet stuttered in agreement, completely thrown off by the overwhelming and menacing presence radiating from Kato. To them, he looked less like an old man and more like one of the terrifying monsters from deep inside the dungeon. They stood there trembling. There was a sudden swishing sound, and in an instant Kato was standing directly in front of them. Black Mask barely had time to register what was happening before Kata's palm came toward him. Kata struck him squarely with a palm strike skill. There was a heavy thud. Kata noticed that Black Mask was wearing a safety vest reinforced with steel plates. He calmly noted that he had hit him directly in the heart. Because adventurers were physically resilient, the strike would not kill him, but he was certainly in tremendous pain. Kata told them all that he would be calling the police shortly, and that it would make things easier for everyone if they simply waited and allowed themselves to be arrested without further resistance. Blackcap was not willing to back down and charged at Kato with the intent to kill. Kato responded with a single kick to his leg. Blackcap's leg snapped. Keita looked at him almost with mild curiosity, wondering aloud whether he was low on calcium given how easily he had broken. Black Helmet then opened a flashing box that sent a burst of blinding light directly into Keita's eyes, and immediately turned and ran, shouting that he was getting away. Keita, still holding his bat, swung it, and sent it flying through the air. It struck Black Helmet hard in the back with a heavy thud. Keita checked on him and confirmed he was still alive, noting that he had tried to hold back and not hit him too hard. Black Helmet, lying on the ground and struggling to speak, demanded to know whether Keita was actually an adventurer, furious that their commander had lied to them. Keita replied simply that he was not. He was just an ordinary office worker who had been woken up in the middle of the night when he had worked the next morning. In Black Helmet's mind, he could not process what had just happened. He could not understand what kind of ordinary salaryman could take down someone with thief skills using nothing but a cheap bat. Akari then came rushing out in a fury, ready to fight, asking if the house had been raided and declaring she would deal with the intruders herself. Hikari also called out to her uncle, alarmed by the noise and asking if he was all right. Keita calmly told them both that everything was fine and reminded them not to be shouting in the middle of the night. Akari grabbed Black Helmet and shook him, asking Keita whether this was the person who had tried to rob them, outraged that anyone would dare target their home. Keita explained that he believed it was part of one of those criminal side schemes that had been going around. Hikari then asked her uncle how he had even known about the intruders while he was asleep. Keita explained that it was thanks to the ornament near the entrance. The wooden bear figure was actually a rare item that could only be obtained by defeating a boss monster in the deeper layers of the Shinjuku dungeon. It created a powerful barrier around whatever building it was placed in and also sent an alert to the person who had installed it whenever intruders were nearby. Keita thanked Hikari for having suggested they put it on display. Hikari explained that the item was extraordinarily rare and that she had panicked when she saw Keita was about to throw it away. She pointed out that there might be other useful things buried among all the old junk stored away in the house. Keita then turned his attention back to Black Helmet and asked him why they had chosen to target their home specifically and who exactly this commander they had mentioned was. Black Helmet insisted that he genuinely did not know the commander's identity. Keita pressed him, suggesting he was still trying to protect someone. Black Helmet nervously maintained that he was telling the truth. The commander had never revealed his real name or shown his face to any of them. He had only told them that the job would be profitable. Even so, Keita already had a strong suspicion in his mind about who was behind it all. Keita's manager told him she had already heard about what happened from the police and acknowledged that it must have been a terrible ordeal. She asked him to include in his daily work report that he had been attacked by criminal side hustlers and was forced to fight them off, which was why he had arrived late. Keita noted that when she said it out loud like that, it sounded like something out of a teenager's fantasy, but since it was the truth, he had no other way to describe it. His manager then asked whether the attackers had been motivated by money, and then hesitantly wondered aloud whether the incident had anything to do with Dakikinya. Keita acknowledged that it was possible the attack was a form of retaliation from Doki, though the criminals themselves did not appear to know much about the situation or the person behind it. His manager expressed concern for his safety and asked whether he needed to consider moving to a different home. Keita reassured her that the police had promised to increase patrols around his neighborhood, and that his sister had agreed to stay with him for the time being. His manager was not entirely at ease with that, pointing out that even though Akari held a black belt, the men involved were washed-up adventurers, and Akari was still a woman. Keita replied that he had already made it clear to his sister that she was not to kill anyone outside of a dungeon and to hold herself back. His manager was taken aback, realizing that Keita's concern was directed not toward his own safety, but toward the well-being of the very people who had attacked him. She then told Keita that if anything else came up, he was free to come to her, since the whole situation might be connected to work and she wanted to help however she could. Keita thanked her sincerely before heading out. Ukai was waiting outside and told Keita that if he was thinking about moving, her apartment building had self-locking doors and there were available units. Keita appreciated the offer but quickly became distracted by something she was carrying. He asked whether it was a stuffed animal. Ukai told him it was actually the latest AI robot and asked if he found it cute. Keita glanced toward his manager, who immediately clarified that it was not hers and that she could never afford something that expensive. Keita asked how much it cost. His manager told him the price was 1 million yen with an additional monthly subscription fee of 50,000 yen. However, if someone paid 2 million yen up front, the monthly fee would be waived entirely. Both Ukai and Keita were stunned by the figure. Looking at the little robot, Keita thought to himself that whatever cuteness it had was completely cancelled out by its price tag. His manager then explained what had led to the purchase. It turned out that their contract with Doom Production had been finalized, an additional loan had been approved, and hush money had been paid out. With all of that settled, their CEO had apparently gone on a spending spree using company funds. Keita found this frustrating, pointing out that if the company had that kind of money to throw around, the CEO could have directed some of it toward the department's budget. It was not long ago that the same CEO had been saying they were on the verge of bankruptcy, and now he was spending so freely. His manager agreed, but reminded him that the CEO was the CEO, and there was nothing she could do about it. Setting that aside, she brought the conversation back to work and asked Keita how his meeting with Doom Production had gone. Keita took a moment and then said, with a kind of grim resignation, that it had gone so well that they were essentially doomed. The person in charge from Doom Production was a highly motivated and capable young man who had come prepared with a whole range of proposals. He had suggested a major overhaul of their flagship magazine, Adventure Stance, repositioning it as fan merchandise for Doom Production by leveraging their well-known streamers. Keita set down a large stack of documents in front of them, project proposals, and sample merchandise concepts, one after another. The plans included launching a new issue with expanded distribution channels and bonus merchandise bundled in every month. On top of that, there were plans to serialize comics and light novels based on the streamers, with future goals of releasing them as both ebooks and print publications. His manager's reaction started to break down in disbelief. Keita kept going. He explained that their department would be responsible for handling all the arrangements, negotiating with major streamers, entertaining them, communicating their requests, and managing all the responsibilities of the sales department. They would also be expected to make last-minute wording adjustments right before deadlines, replace photos on demand at any hour of the day or night, make sales calls to bookstores, arrange factories for merchandise production, and coordinate with illustrators and prototype sculptors. And since it was a weekly magazine, all of this would come at them without pause or rest. He finished by asking how the sales department felt about being the ones to handle everything. There was a long silence. Ukai, confused by the lack of response, called out to check if anyone was still there. Then she finally snapped back to reality and declared that what Keita had just described was completely impossible. His manager calmly told Keita not to expect to be going home on time for a very long time. Keita stood there quietly thinking to himself, wondering whether it would be 1 year or maybe 2. The little AI robot beside them let out a small squeak and spun around cheerfully, completely indifferent to the gravity of the situation. 2 weeks passed. The clock in the office continued to tick, and Keita was still there. He had not been home in 3 days and felt as though he was barely surviving. Then his phone buzzed. It was Hikari calling. She asked if he was all right and whether he was still alive. Keita answered that he was, barely, and that he thought he might actually make it home that day. Hikari told him he sounded completely lifeless, like a zombie, and asked again whether he was truly all right, expressing concern that the pressure must be getting to him. Keita confirmed it was rough. Their workload had increased tenfold, but the number of staff had not changed at all. There was simply no time to sleep. Hikari urged him to take a break and said she was worried he would ruin his health. Keita glanced over at his boss and told her that was not an option. He then asked how things were going on her end. Hikari told him that police officers came by every day and that adventurers from the local vigilante group had been patrolling the area as well. Keita noted that since 2 weeks had now passed, the heightened alert level would probably be lifted soon, and he reminded her to stay careful on her way to and from school. Hikari said she understood and told him warmly that she was happy to be looked after. She then asked whether he had seen the location she had sent him through the app. Keita asked in return whether she meant that he should move there. Hikari reacted with immediate refusal. She had absolutely no intention of being separated from her uncle and said so firmly. Keita pointed out that since their home's location had been exposed, there was a real safety concern. But Hikari was completely immovable. She told him she would never leave him to live alone, and that this was not up for discussion. Keita accepted that. Privately, he was deeply moved by how strongly his niece felt about staying by his side. But at the same time, he felt the weight of his situation pressing down on him. As long as the relentless work continued, he could not even take the steps needed to protect his family. It felt like invisible chains were holding him in place. Hikari asked once more whether he was really coming home that night and reminded him to keep his GPS location on. Keita said he would, but mentioned that he wanted to stop somewhere along the way to clear his head, so he would likely be back late. Hikari said that was fine and told him she would have the bath ready and dinner waiting for whenever he got back. Keita thanked her and told her that meant a great deal to him. Meanwhile, on Hikari's phone screen, she was looking at the comments section under an unreleased clip from Shinjuku Batter's channel. The video had accumulated 59,000 views over 5 days, and the comments had grown increasingly restless. Viewers were asking why there had been no updates. Some were joking that the old man had died. Others were speculating seriously that Shinjuku Batter had truly vanished, with some pointing out that adventurers only respawn if they die inside a dungeon, meaning that if he had died outside of one, there would be no coming back. One comment flatly said it was probably death from overwork. Another declared that he had gone missing and was now gone for good. Hikari thought to herself that she understood Keita had been overwhelmed with work, but the situation with his channel had reached a point where people were genuinely starting to believe that Shinjuku Batter had disappeared. Reposting old clips to keep the channel from going completely silent could only go so far before it stopped being enough. Somewhere else entirely, another person was watching the same video. He muttered quietly to himself, wondering whether Shinjuku Batter was actually dead, and telling him to come back out already so that he could prove once and for all that he was the strongest. One of Doom Production's top 3 acts was a streamer unit called Blueberry Paladin, commonly known as Blue Para. The group was made up of 3 adventurers from Doom Production named Kajuniko, Soma, and Kurenai. Soma and Kurenai had originally worked as a duo, but when Kajuniko joined the group, their popularity shot up dramatically. The relaunched issue of Adventure Stance that came bundled with a Blue Para figurine had quickly become a major talking point among fans. Keita was at his computer reviewing the numbers. The minimum order quantity had been set at 12,000 copies, but the online pre-orders had sold out almost the moment they went live. His manager noted the enormous difference compared to their previous experience with Vergood, and acknowledged that the drawing power of major streamers operated on an entirely different level. Keita pointed out that most of the copies had been bought up by resellers, and social media was already overflowing with frustrated fans expressing their disappointment. The complaints were pouring in. His manager said she had a feeling something like this would happen. Ukai added that the situation was made worse by the fact that the figurine included with each copy was randomized across 3 different variants, which had only made the resale frenzy more intense. His manager said something had to be done about it, expressing frustration that all their hard work was essentially just benefiting scalpers. Keita asked Ukai how things were going on the editorial side. Ukai broke down in distress, saying she was completely overwhelmed. On top of everything else, Kajuniko had been fiercely refusing to participate in the photo shoot planned for the opening spread. Their schedule was already packed beyond capacity, and she had no idea how to handle it. His manager asked what Kajuniko's objection was. Ukai explained that Kajuniko had been making a huge fuss and found the whole concept deeply embarrassing. The idea in question was a cross-dressing cosplay shoot. His manager found the concept bold but admitted she would have loved to see it. Ukai agreed that she had also thought it was a great pitch, and that Doom Production had even given their approval. Even so, she was starting to think it might be safer to switch to something more straightforward, like casual clothes or uniforms. His manager said it was a shame, but acknowledged there was nothing they could do if the person involved was strongly against it. Keita quietly thought to himself that everyone had their own limits and preferences, and that even if his manager personally had an enthusiasm for cross-dressing concepts, Sato at least had the sense not to voice that out loud in the wrong setting. His manager then turned to the more pressing issue of the resale problem and asked Keita whether simply increasing the production volume would help solve it. Keita said that it probably would, or alternatively, they could switch to a made-to-order system, at least for the figurines. His manager closed her eyes, made a decision, and announced that she was going to go negotiate with their boss for a bigger budget. She also pointed out that if they were going to produce more figures, they would obviously need to double the staff, otherwise the workload alone would kill them. She told Keita to come with her. The 2 of them made their way to the CEO's office. The answer they received was a flat refusal. The CEO told them that hiring more people would only eat into their profits, and asked if they understood that. His manager was visibly shocked. The CEO went further, suggesting that they already had enough staff, and that perhaps the team simply was not working hard enough. His manager pushed back firmly, explaining that they were already sacrificing their days off and working overtime every single day just to barely keep things running. The CEO brushed this off, expressing confidence that they could push through, and pointed out that if they still had the energy to come and complain in person, they were clearly not at their limit yet. Keita stood there in silence. In his mind, he found himself thinking about how different this man was from their former CEO. He remembered a time long ago when he had returned after a prolonged absence and had gone to apologize. The former CEO had told him not to worry about it at all. After everything that had happened with the dungeon disaster, he had simply been relieved that Keita had made it back alive. The former CEO had expressed genuine gratitude toward him, had continued paying Keita's salary throughout the entire period he was away, and had even given him a bonus to help him recover. That was the reason Keita had stayed with this company all these years. The words and actions of that man had meant everything to him. The current CEO, meanwhile, continued speaking. He declared that having a job was a privilege, and that it was only natural for employees to devote themselves entirely to their company as their highest priority. Keita thought to himself that he really wanted to beat the man senseless. His manager, sensing the fury building in Keita, quietly signaled to him to hold back. Keita responded calmly and obediently, though behind his back, both of his hands were clenched into tight fists. His manager then shifted tactics and calmly pointed out to the CEO that at their current pace, they were nowhere close to meeting Doom Production standards, and that if that continued, Doom Production might choose to terminate the contract and even pull back their funding. The CEO erupted, demanding to know if she was threatening him. His manager replied smoothly that she was simply seeking his guidance as a manager. The CEO looked away without another word. The 2 of them excused themselves and left. Out in the hallway, his manager told Keita not to do anything to the CEO just yet, explaining that they would destroy him professionally instead. Keita apologized for almost losing his composure. His manager mentioned that she had made a hidden recording of the conversation as a precaution, though she acknowledged it was not exactly airtight as evidence given the way it had been obtained. Keita remarked that it was probably more useful as proof of the CEO's incompetence than as evidence of any actual crime. His manager pointed out that it was still more than enough to file a report with the Labor Standards Office, and that the CEO was almost certainly in violation. Keita agreed and suggested they loop in the accounting department, confident they would find further wrongdoing there as well. Keita stopped at the vending machine and got his manager a mixed coffee. She thanked him and said she would pay him back. Keita told her not to worry about it and that it was his treat. She remarked that he knew her tastes well, and Keita replied simply that since their desks were close together, he had naturally picked up on it over time. Privately, he thought to himself that his manager was also a victim of the situation and that the company might truly be heading towards serious trouble. Later that evening, Ukai wished Keita a good evening as he prepared to leave, and he returned the farewell. Inside, he was exhausted and starving. He longed to sleep in his own bed and take a proper bath. But not yet. He could not rest while carrying this much pent-up stress. He needed to release it first. He made his way to the deeper layers of the Shinjuku dungeon, descending all the way to the level 140 zone near the border area. As he stepped inside, he felt something settle within him. He had missed this place deeply, and it had been a long time since he had been back. It felt like coming home. Then he heard a footstep. An armored soldier appeared and came charging at him from behind with a thunderous roar. Keita threw a punch without even turning fully, and it connected before the soldier could reach him. The impact cracked the soldier's ribs and sent it coughing up blood. The soldier cursed at him. Keita looked around the area slowly and calmly. He could tell that others were concealed nearby, watching, and he let them know without any urgency that he could see exactly where they were hiding.